Forgotten. Shifters Forever Worlds Book 13 by Thorne.
Chapter 1. Once. Just once, Anya would like to be in America for Christmas. Not that Christmas was a big deal for someone who had no family. Anya Masenti, a white tigress shifter, half Puerto Rican, half Italian, raised in America, was in Monaco. Yes, all the way across the big ocean on assignment. She hadn't been back to the good old USA since she was a teen. She stopped the Peugeot and stared at the white villa in front of her. No Christmas decorations. She blinked her wishful and wistful thinking away and reassessed the villa. Gated entrance. The villa was not atypical for one in Monaco, though there was a large range in types of villas here. Some were newer and techier looking, and some were of the older, more sophisticated generation. Either way, there was a lot of money in Monaco. Why didn't Saz find someone more familiar with Monaco to send for this assignment? There are more experienced agents not far away. She opened the file and read the details again. Although she felt she already had them memorized, she'd studied them so much and they were sparse. Client Bryson Courtland. Client bio, an American who'd spent a decade in Europe. A shifter. Leopard. Mission, personal security. There were no more details than that. Was she doing a threat assessment? Was she his personal bodyguard? A male agent would have been better suited for this, considering the client. She glanced at Bryson Courtland's photo, paperclip to the paperwork. Heat traveled up her chest to her cheeks, warming them. She didn't need to look into the mirror to know her pale complexion had a red glow to it. She chastised herself for the blush. It's not like I'm a virgin. Her tigress growled. I know. It's been forever since I've kissed a man. Or felt anything for a man. I get that. What am I supposed to do, randomly sleep with men because I get horny? Her tigress roared this time. Anya wasn't sure whether her tigress had roared in agreement or disagreement, so she tuned her out because she wasn't interested in getting into a snarling debate right now. She didn't need to be late for her appointment. She glanced at the file again. Studied the photo. The man in the photo, Bryson Courtland, she reminded herself, was striking. Maybe striking didn't quite cover it. He was hot. Sexistic hot. Dark-haired and blue-eyed, a combination she hadn't seen much of. She drank in the planes of his face, her gaze staying on his full lips far longer than it should have. His cheekbones were well-defined, his hair wavy and thick, the kind of thick you wanted to run your fingers through. God, yes, hot. Totally hot. Sex on a damn stick hot. Her tigress chuffed in appreciation. Oh, hell to the no. We do not sleep with clients. Ever. The tigress snarled in Anya's head, but she did back off. Thank goodness. It didn't list his marital status or if he had any children. All it said was, he was an American. Saz was usually much more thorough in creating a dossier for a new assignment. She hefted the file. Yes, definitely lighter than typical client files. She took a deep breath and put the car into gear. Time to head into the villa to meet the client. She nosed the car toward the wrought iron gate. The driveway was so immaculate, someone certainly manicured and swept it daily. Hell, maybe twice a day. I guess that's what this kind of money gets you. Not that Anya wasn't used to clients who had money. Tons of money. But not this kind. Not Monaco kind. What the hell did the man do for a living? And why didn't the dossier cover that? I'm going to choose Saz a new one for this. It's bullshit, sending me in here half prepared. You don't send your people into battle ill-equipped. She lowered the window and pressed on the silver button. Yes, a feminine voice said. Wife. Housekeeper. Secretary. Anya would find out soon enough. Anya Masenti. I have an 11 o'clock with Mr. Courtland. The gate glided open, swinging wide with a low mechanical whir. Anya pulled in, passing columns garnished with stone lions. Then she heard the voice on the speaker at the gate giving her directions. All she could hear was a voice, unable to make out the words since she'd driven too far past the speaker, even for her super-sensitive shifter hearing. She'd figure it out when she got inside. She pulled up behind a Lamborghini. A Lamborghini, for Pete's sake. She refrained from shaking her head. Yes, this Bryson Courtland had way more money than any other client she'd worked with. God, I hope this doesn't make him an asshole. No matter how hot a guy was, if he was an asshole, then his hotness couldn't make up for it. She braced herself mentally, preparing for the inevitability of his assholeness. She put the Peugeot in park and got out, smoothing her business slacks, making sure the 9mm in her holster wasn't creating too much of a budge. She heard the sound of the front door opening and looked up, expecting the housekeeper. Only this wasn't the housekeeper. Her breath was trapped in her lungs, which were unwilling to work. She stared.
Bryson Courtland stood in the doorway. Well over 6 foot, probably 6'4" if she had to guess. His wide shoulders filled the doorway, dropping to a broad chest with muscles that flexed beneath a casual golf shirt. The chest tapered down, the shirt hugging his abs. An arm on the door pulled his shirt tighter, showing off those abs, emphasizing each segment in a six-pack. The pants flared into his thighs, quads that had definitely seen a gym, possibly even a soccer field. Her tigress roared, definitely interested in Bryson and his leopard. Anya gulped down the lust coursing through her, pushed her tigress away, and stepped toward the staircase leading to the front door. Miss Masenti. Anya Masenti. His voice. God, that voice. Deep. Sexy to the extreme. A vibration rushed through her like the first tremors of an earthquake. I'm Anya Masenti. Her voice held the same quiver coursing throughout her veins. Geez. Really? Anya mentally smacked herself around. Quit acting like a teenager in front of a pop idol. Bryson Courtland froze. He couldn't drop his arm from the door jamb. He couldn't coax his legs to take a step toward the stunning redhead in front of him. Hell, he couldn't take a step backward either, if he wanted to. She was dressed in a black pantsuit that hugged her curves in all the right ways, emphasizing an hourglass figure demurely covered in a white top and the black slacks. Her long red hair hung loose, waves begging for fingers to go exploring. The gaze she sent his way, those green eyes offset by fair skin the color of cream, made his pulse kickstart. His leopard snarled in his mind. Bryson shook his head, pushing the leopard away. He might have been shoving his big cat aside, but he was feeling the same sentiments. Why hadn't Saws told him about her? Why didn't he mention cheese? His leopard growled. Like this. His leopard snarled. All that? Bryson and Saws went way back. When Bryson had told Saws about his problem, Cass's reply had been, I know the perfect person for this. Her name is Anya Masenti. I'll send her immediately. But Saws hadn't said she was. Again, his leopard interrupted with a roar. Bryson wanted to ignore the leopard. God, did he ever. But that wasn't the nature of their relationship, not by a long shot. Bryson and his leopard were tight, and always had been. And when the leopard told Bryson something, there was no doubt it was true. The leopard was giving him a single message right now, and all Bryson could think of was, how did Saws know? The leopard kept insisting, she's the one. She was staring at him. He swallowed what felt like a lump of fine sand in his throat. Then an emotion washed over her face, so quickly, so fleeting, he couldn't catch it. She veiled her feelings, and became the stoic professional Saws had assured Bryson she was. Lump gone, he attempted to talk. Miss Masenti. Anya Masenti. She gave him an icy look. I'm Anya Masenti. He tried to glean her scent, to assess her interest, but to no avail. Damn. She'd used Hunter's block. Of course she had. She was paid to be vigilant. No shifter bodyguard worth their salt would want to give their presence or state of mind away. He found himself admiring her because she didn't have to use the Hunter's block. She wasn't on the job yet, not technically. She didn't have to take extra security measures. Join me for a visit. He pushed the door open wider. "Certainly, Mr. Courtland." "Bryson." "Bryson." Her tongue turned his name into a caress. He closed the door behind her, then gestured toward the sitting room and watched her as she preceded him. He couldn't tear his eyes from the apple of her ass as her hips swayed. She sat in a wing chair, her back straight, her posture as stiff as if she was on guard. She probably was. He sprawled out on the sofa. "Saz McClellan didn't give me much information, mister," she paused. "Bryson." He smiled, acknowledging his pleasure that she'd called him by his first name. "What did Saz tell you about the assignment?" "Nothing." She pulled a file from the attaché case she'd carried in. "Was there a reason for such minimal information? Did you withhold it, or did he?" "I wanted to see who he sent out first." Her eyes narrowed, she nodded. "I'm glad it was you." Now, why the hell had he said that? Damn, he felt like he was in 7th grade, telling a girl he liked her. So why am I here?
Chapter 2. Anya studied Bryson Courtland from beneath her lashes. One long leg was flung over the other one, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked the very image of a predator that seemed to be at rest, but in reality was ready to spring into action. A cell phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket and grimaced. "Urgent matter. Please excuse me." He rose and moved out of the room with that stealthy stride shifters had. Which reminded her, he was a shifter, and most shifters took care of themselves and their own security. The McClellan group mostly served the needs of humans, but also specialized in shifter security for those special times, special circumstances. What are his circumstances? She glanced around the room. Not a single Christmas decoration in sight. Anya remembered Christmases at May's home. The scent of cinnamon and oranges. A turkey and a ham. Presents. A thought came to her, and she tried to push it back, tried to get rid of the living nightmare that still plagued her. And the reason she hadn't had a Christmas in forever. Not since that last Christmas with Astra's family. The tragedy she'd experienced when she was younger haunted Anya's memories and her nights. She'd watched her best friend Astra almost die and Astra's mother be slaughtered by shifters. Anya had been powerless to assist. She'd shifted into her tigress and tried to defend them, but the attackers were full-grown shifters, and she was a young solitary shifter doing battle with several. She shook her head, wishing the memory would go away. Doc Evans, Astra's stepfather, had appeared and saved Astra and Anya from the shifters, but it was too late for Astra's mother. Then he'd packed Astra up and taken her away to who knew where, while Anya stayed behind in Bear Canyon Valley, trapped with the memories and nightmares of her best friend's mother being murdered. Anya had been unable to sleep after that day. Every time she'd close her eyes, just when she'd almost drifted off, she'd sit up screaming. Her foster mother, May Forrester, had tried and tried to help her through it to no avail. Then one day, May had sent Anya away from Bear Canyon Valley to find peace. She suggested Anya make accord with her tigress and stop blaming her. She sent Anya to see Saz McClellan to learn how to protect herself, so she would stop fearing everything, including her own shadow. Except there was no relief for Anya, not really. She'd never found out what happened to her friend Astra. Anya had blamed her tigress and hated her for many years because she hadn't protected them from the shifters. Now, years later, Anya was one of Cass's employees. And she no longer hated her tigress. A slight footstep alerted Anya to Bryson's return, and a second later he appeared at the doorway. She forced a smile to her face, though her mind remained entrenched in those memories of Astra and the past. "I apologize." Bryson pocketed his phone. "Some things are dire." "No problem. Back to the subject. Why am I here?" "Straight to the point. I like that in a business person." He smiled, and she was certain that wasn't what he originally was going to say. "Safety is an issue, hence hiring the McClellan Group, which in turn sent you." That was a rather broad explanation. "What specific threat is it that concerns you?" "Safety." She was getting nowhere. You mean your personal safety? The safety of your home? Of course, I'd like to know my home is impenetrable. I wouldn't want the ones I love hurt. Ones he loved? Probably a wife. She bit back her disappointment. Could I get a tour of your residence, so I can make an assessment of security needs and risks for a team? His dark blue eyes glittered. He stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Team? I didn't hire a team. I hired you. I told Saz McClellan specifically no team. Great. Just great. The thin dossier file. The no team thing. This merited a call to Saz. Like now. Let me introduce you to the one you'll be protecting. You're not the client. The client must be his wife. Great. And I've been lusting after him. There's a special place in hell for me. I am the client, as in I'm footing the bill. But I'm not the one you'll be looking after. He turned his head toward the door. She studied his profile. Those full lips. High cheekbones, planes that boasted masculinity. Stop it. Stop it. He's a married man. Bryson pressed on a button on the end table. Pepper? Come on in. Pepper? A 5-year-old bounced into the room, a bundle of pigtails and cuteness with a scent that screamed shifter. Yes, Daddy? He indicated Anya. The little girl swung her blonde head in Anya's direction. This is Pepper. Pepper, meet your bodyguard, Anya. Anya couldn't breathe. She hadn't had a breathing problem like this since she'd left Bear Canyon Valley. She gulped air in and fought to maintain her composure and calm her pulse. Wait a minute. No. I don't do this. I don't take care of children. My rule. No children. Saz knows my rule. She wasn't willing to go through another incident like Astra's. She stood up. The room felt like it was spinning. The little one with vibrant green eyes and blonde hair stared back at her. She was the spitting image of Astra. Anya reached for the back of the chair and used it to give herself some support while she gathered her composure. She pushed the spinning sensation away and swallowed hard. I can't. Excuse me, I have a phone call to make. She stepped outside the room and went to the end of the hallway, where she leaned against the wall. Then she ripped the phone out of her pocket and panic-pressed the screen. Saz, what the hell is this about?
Bryson stared after the beautiful white tigress shifter. She'd been special ordered by Saz McClellan. Bryson had always managed his daughter's protection himself, but they'd gotten a message about there being suspicious individuals in the area. Couple that with the ever-present threat. Daddy. What's wrong with Anya? I'm not sure. She had to make a phone call. What did she mean? She doesn't do this. She doesn't take care of. Take care of what?
Chapter 3. Anya. She could tell from the tone of Cass's voice he knew why she was calling. And he'd known she'd call. You knew. The sound of accusation dripped from her voice, and she couldn't help it. She felt betrayed like she never had before. She took a deep breath, held it, counted to 10 while gripping the white wall for support, her nails digging into the hard surface. I knew what he wanted, Saz admitted. She breathed out. And you still sent me here. Saz exhaled, filling her ear with the sound of static. I need you there. No one else can do this job like you. Why? Her voice was small, a vestige of her normal self. No one can match your passion in a situation like this. Your commitment to keeping Pepper safe would be unparalleled. Anya tried to take another breath, but the pinpricks of tears chipped away at her strength. Angry tears, the tears of betrayal. Anya. Cass's concern was evident in his voice. What? She spit the word out. Please? As a personal favor to me, and for that little girl? Did you meet her? Damn you. She clenched her jaw muscles and gritted her teeth. Did you know she looks just like Astra? I never met Astra. Was he going to pull the offer back? Was he going to allow her to pass on the assignment? Would this defeat her? Behind her, she heard the whisper of fabric and turned to confront the intruder. A few paces away from Anya, Pepper froze, her lips a thin line in her pale face. With wide, luminescent green eyes just like Astra's, Pepper watched her and waited. Those were an old soul's eyes. Anya couldn't look away. She was hypnotized, captured by the little girl's stare as surely as if she were caught in a trap. Anya knew Saz was talking, but his voice was a low thrum, far away. She couldn't make out a word he was saying, because she was plummeting down the tunnel Pepper's eyes were pulling her into. She was spinning, going deeper and deeper into an abyss of seafoam green. Anya shook her head and tore her gaze away from Pepper. She turned her back on the child to break the effect, and put her hand over the phone so she could make an attempt at privacy. "What's with her?" "You'll have to ask Bryson." The connection was scratchy, distorting his words. "Will you stay?" She glanced behind her. Pepper was gone. "No." "Yes," she whispered.
Bryson strained to hear what was being said, but there was nothing but silence, occasionally broken by the low sound of Anya's murmured voice. Pepper had slipped out of the room. He'd presumed it was to play, until she ran back in and threw her arms around his waist. "I don't think she wants to be my bodyguard, Daddy." Bryson put his arm around his baby girl. "I'm sure it's not you. Maybe she has other responsibilities to take care of." He looked into Pepper's vibrant gaze. A flash of dark blue coursed through their green depths. He planted a kiss in the middle of her forehead. "I'll be damned if I'll let anything happen to you." Even if Anya wasn't willing to help. A click of the woman's shoes on the Italian marble floor alerted him to her approach, and a second later, she appeared around the corner at the threshold. Her face was pale, emphasizing the green of her eyes. Not the same green as Pepper's, Anya's was a deep green, like the bottom of a lake he'd seen once long ago. Her lips were flattened into a forbidding seam. She resumed her seat across from him, in the wing chair she'd been in before. Now her posture reminded him of a fortress with the drawbridge raised. "Pepper." Her voice had a strained quality to it. "Would you give me a minute of privacy with your father?" Pepper lifted her head from his chest and swung her gaze in Anya's direction. Could Anya see the deep blue in their depths? Would she know what it was? If she didn't, should he tell her? Would that sway her decision, one way or another? Pepper nodded. "After that, I'd like a minute of privacy with you too," Anya added. "You don't have to do that, just to make me feel better." Pepper sounded so grown up. Bryson's heart filled with a bittersweet joy, because his little girl wasn't ever going to be able to fully enjoy being just a little girl. Anya raised an eyebrow and leveled Pepper with a look that took her measure, and yet displayed her respect. "I'm not. I really want to talk to you." This made Bryson more nervous than anything. What if Pepper said something? What if she told Anya the truth? He hadn't prepped her, or told her to keep anything from Anya. Pepper nodded and pulled herself from his embrace. She slipped out of the room, glancing back at Bryson, the hint of blue completely gone from her eyes. Anya's green stare was steady and unflinching. She didn't peel her gaze from his. Deep within Bryson, his leopard paced, chuffing and snarling intermittently. Why was his leopard at odds with this situation? He wanted to have a conversation with his leopard, but he couldn't. That would mean he wouldn't be able to fully process whatever Anya was going to tell him. There was no way he could split his attention between the two of them. He mentally drifted away from his leopard and focused on Anya. Except she was quiet, just staring at him with those disconcerting, laser-lethal eyes. "So?" Bryson prompted her, hoping she'd say something, anything, even if it meant things became heated. "Why am I here? My spidey senses are telling me something is up." She attempted a smile, but it was clearly forced. Her hands gripped the armrests, her knuckles white. "Saz thought you were right for the job." Her chin lifted in defiance. "Bullshit. It's more than that. Saz thought you were right for Pepper." Her eyes narrowed, resembling blades of dark green grass. That's it. What aren't you telling me? He swallowed hard. He couldn't tell her about Pepper. What if that pushed her away? Shifters didn't care for other types of beings. Because of your history. Her nostrils flared. He could see her toes curling in her shoes, as if she was trying to control her anger, but it was finding covert ways to release itself. He told you about that. How dare he? She catapulted herself from the chair, as if someone had pressed an eject button. She was almost out of the room when he caught up with her. He had no clue what the hell he'd been thinking, but he wanted to blame his leopard for what happened next. One of his hands landed on her waist, the other on her shoulder. Halting her egress, he spun her around. Her green eyes widened, and then her gaze traveled directly to his lips. The way she looked at his lips was Bryson's undoing, and his leopard's too. He lowered his hand and gripped her hip with an unleashed ferocity, while his other hand twisted her hair around his fist. He pulled her head back until her lips were a pink, rosy offering. He swooped in, lowering his mouth to hers, and his leopard roared at the moan that was wrenched from her throat. The tiny sound parted her lips just enough for his tongue to snake in, tasting her essence. The sweetness and earthiness of her made his pulse race and his body react. A throbbing began, demanding and insistent. Her lids dropped, sealing her gaze and her emotions from him. His tongue took hers captive, demanding, claiming and validating everything his leopard had let him know. She returned his initiative with a slow, burning kiss that had him imagining that tongue of hers on other places on his body. He bit back a groan. The kiss was a tango, eternal, fierce, feral, and filled with an age-old passion until her eyes flew open, a green fire scalding him with its fury, and he had no time to react. With a mighty heave, she shoved against his chest and pushed herself out of his arms. Scarcely a foot between them, she glared at him. Bryson was speechless. Always in control of himself, he'd never yielded to an emotion like this before.
Chapter 4. What the hell did I just do? I kissed him. That's what. Damn. 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 What had she been thinking, kissing Bryson Courtland like that? Encouraging him? Anya didn't get involved, not with clients, not with fellow employees, not with any men. The Ice Princess, that was her nickname at work because she didn't get involved with anyone. She never even considered a date when she was Axe. Anya kept to herself. She never offered an explanation, didn't tell anyone why. Now I've gone and done something I don't do. With a client no less. This was a reason to abandon an assignment, if one ever existed. She'd been ready to take the job, but now with this complication. Mr. Courtland. His face fell, as if he knew what was coming. No. I can't let you do that. He did know. Was this guy psychic? It's Bryson, and I can't let you abandon Pepper. We need you. He'd said we. The word bounced around in her head. I'm not a good one to need. I've let people down. The vision of Astra's dead mother, mauled and bloody, flew through her mind. Sir, what just happened? That's not a good foundation for a working relationship. Let me call Saz and have someone else sent in. No. The word came from behind her. Anya whirled around. Pepper was standing there, green eyes flashing, a splash of blue in their green depths, or maybe that was a trick the shadows were playing on her mind. Pepper. No. The little girl's voice didn't sound like her own. You can't do that. You said you would come talk to me. You can't break your word. What the hell does a 5-year-old know about keeping your word? Anya looked at Bryson. His gaze was steely and unreadable, as if Pepper's disappointment was Anya's problem to fix. I guess it is mine to fix. Excuse us, Anya said to him and took Pepper by the hand. Can we go somewhere private to talk, Pepper? And I'll try to get hold of my thoughts and come up with something to say. Had Pepper seen the kiss? A flame licked up Anya's chest and neck, creeping its way to her cheeks. I hope not. We'll go to my playroom. Daddy, you don't come close. And don't use your special hearing to listen in. Anya glanced at Bryson. A look of chagrin crossed his face. Busted. She followed Pepper up a marble staircase and into a room that was nothing like what she'd expected a little girl's playroom to be. Even a little girl shifter's playroom. It wasn't pink. It wasn't frilly. It wasn't Princess Y. The walls were a deep blue and the furniture was full-sized. She glanced at the bookshelf full of books. No matter where she looked, she didn't find any signs of a little girl. Pepper was solemnly quiet, her voice low as she talked to Anya. I guess it's not what you expected. Not exactly. It's really not my playroom, it's Marley's. Should she ask who Marley's was? Perhaps she was an older sibling. She waited for Pepper to continue, but she didn't, so she gave in to temptation and took a different route. Do you have a playroom that's more suited to you? The house was certainly large enough to have more than one playroom. I play in my bedroom. Where's Marley's now? That seemed like a safe question. She's here. Anya nodded. Will I get to meet her? I'm not sure my daddy wants you to. Why not? Pepper cocked her head. He thinks you'll leave if you do. Anya had been looking at the books on the bookshelf. Hemingway, Steinbeck. As soon as Pepper started to speak, Anya's head snapped in her direction. The timbre of the child's voice had changed. She almost sounded grown up, and her eyes looked different for a second, then that went away. What did you say? My dad and I need you to stay. Her voice was back to a little girl's voice. Please say you will. She stared at Anya, those brilliant green eyes begging. Oh, it's not that easy. Sure it is. Pepper's head tilted to the left again, and this time when her eyes changed, Anya caught it. An indigo flash traversed their depths, glinting mysteriously. It's why you're here. Pepper's voice had changed. Is there something you should tell me, Pepper? No. Pepper's bottom lip stuck out in a pout. My daddy wouldn't want me discussing that. What's that? Pepper crossed her arms over her chest and shook her head so hard she swiveled with it. I can't say. Thank you for showing me your playroom. Will you stay? I shouldn't. Bryson was working on his computer in the same room he'd been in when Pepper took Anya upstairs. He had no real idea what he was looking at or what he was working on. He was on pins and needles about the visit between his daughter and the bodyguard. What was she going to say? What would Marley say?
He heard them approaching, talking quietly without dissent. Maybe it had gone well. He closed the lid on his laptop immediately. Anya gave him a tight smile, belying the casual tone she'd used with Pepper. Should I do a threat assessment? You're staying. He fought to keep his shock from coming out, and wrangled with his pulse out of concern Anya would read his excitement. She is, Daddy. Pepper bounced up and down on her tiptoes. She did a plie and an arabesque as best as her not fully coordinated body could handle. Bravo. Well done. Senora Isabel will be very proud of your progress. He smiled at Pepper's cuteness. Then he glanced at Anya. That's her dance teacher. My little girl loves her ballet. Still smiling, he tugged on the ends of Pepper's hair. Pepper, would you give me a few minutes to give Anya a tour of the house? It's your lunchtime, and Senora Portofino was looking for you. She made pizza, like the kind you had at the restaurant last week. Our housekeeper. You'll get to meet her later, he explained to Anya, then turned back to Pepper. I'll find you after lunch. Put your tights and leotard on. You have dance class this afternoon. Pepper scampered off, leaving them alone. Ready for a tour? Yes, and I have some questions for you. She gave him a look he couldn't decipher. Oh hell. Here we go.
Chapter 5. Most women would have been checking out the decor, the marble, the ivory, the antiques. That was not what Anya looked at. Her focus was on the security cameras, motion sensors, power sources, door and window placements, clear zones, security lighting, and the large trees that were close to exterior walls or rooftops on the villa. She remained silent during the 30-minute tour, with the exception of an occasional question relating to threat assessment. She couldn't deny being aware of having him next to her, in spite of her professionalism and her attention not being divided. His body's heat warmed hers, making her blood course through her veins at a much more rapid pace. The scent of him penetrated her mind and infiltrated her lungs, enduring like a dream lingered even after one awakened. They had returned to the front of the house when he said, "Ms. Masenti." "Anya." She turned to him. "Yes?" "God, he's gorgeous. Are you planning on revamping my entire security system? What I really need is simply someone to make sure she's safe when I'm not around. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" He looked down then left. His gaze remained averted from hers. "Bryson." She cleared her throat and waited until he raised his eyes to hers. When he did, she continued, "I can't be of any help if you don't tell me the specifics." Pepper's grandmother. She told the wrong people about Pepper. She was still missing something. So, where's Pepper's mother? She felt safe asking that. It wasn't like he'd said Pepper's mother was dead. "She's?" His throat worked. "She's gone." "Just gone?" Sadness crossed his face. "Not exactly." The pain on his face made her want to leave that wound alone, though she really needed answers. Anya switched tacks. "So back to Anya's grandmother." "That's not important. Saw said you were the right one to help us. That you would take this matter to heart more than most, because of what you've been through." Again, she had to wonder how much Saz had told him about Astra, about Bear Canyon Valley. It could be important. "You do realize you need to be more specific, right?" Bryson bit back an exhale. Anya would quit now for sure before she'd started. How could he tell her Pepper's grandmother had an elemental in her, and that Pepper did too, and the grandmother had told some others Pepper was a hybrid and now she was being hunted? Hell, did Anya know what an elemental was? He hadn't until he'd met Pepper's mother. He studied her clear gaze. She seemed trustworthy, and his leopard definitely agreed. He scrubbed at his face, shook his head and plunged in. "Do you know what elementals are?" Anya's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent. "Pepper is an elemental. I mean, she has one in her, so that gives her elemental skills." "Wait a minute." Anya drummed on the chair's arm with her fingertips. "She's a shifter." "Pepper is a shifter." "What are you talking about?" "She's actually a hybrid. And that's rare. I didn't know anything about elementals. I had no clue what they were or anything about them when I first met Pepper's mother. That was something I found out about afterwards. Much, much later, when I noticed Pepper had learned to speak too early. Learned to walk too early. Learned everything too early." He paused to take a deep breath. This was the first time he'd talked about it to anyone, and it felt good, damned good, to share his burden. "Then I noticed the eye color changes. And the voice changes." "I caught that," Anya said, her tone low. He kept his eyes focused on his hands in his lap. "When I first asked about it, I was told it was my imagination. And then one day, after Pepper's mother was gone, Pepper and I were having a conversation when Marley's her elemental joined in." Anya gasped. He looked up at her. "What?" "She said that name to me. She said the playroom belonged to Marley's and she was there with us. So Pepper's a leopard shifter with an elemental?" "Yes. And that's very rare. Her grandmother told someone about it, and now they want to take her to the Order of Elementals." He fought to keep his voice level and the torment in his soul from showing in his eyes. He was certain he'd failed, so he lowered his gaze again, hoping she wouldn't see. Anya could see how Bryson was struggling, that he wasn't one to open up like this. She knew all about keeping secrets, and realized this wasn't easy for him. "God, what am I getting into?" Her tigress snarled in agreement. "When do I start?" "You're staying?" He looked surprised. "How can I not? How can I abandon that little girl? She nodded. You'll be staying here, and... He pursed his lips, as if he was pondering his options. You didn't bring anything with you, did you? Clothes and such? I wasn't sure about the nature of the job. She held up the file. There's very little information in here. Does Saz know she's a hybrid? Only Saz knows, he said. I didn't want what she is, appearing on paper anywhere. He ran his fingers over his face, the strain of the stress he'd been under obvious in the lines on his forehead. How about you pack and come back tomorrow? You'll stay on site, right? I told Saz that's what I needed. I go to meetings in the early mornings and sometimes in the evenings. It would be good if you were here 24 hours a day. I'll take Pepper to ballet today, so you don't have to worry about getting back on time. Tomorrow I'll go with you, so I can introduce you to Isabel Tiero, her teacher. After that, taking her to ballet can be your thing. Also, Pepper attends private school, though she's on holiday break now. I'll stay on site. I'd like a picture of her grandmother. And her mother. You do have one, right? Chapter 6. The next morning. Her first day on the job, Anya sat in the seat of her Peugeot in front of the villa and guided herself through some breathing exercises. She knew her nerves had nothing to do with being a bodyguard and everything to do with two other factors. The first factor was being around Bryson. The attraction between them was too strong, and pushing her tigress back every time he was around wouldn't be easy. It had taken Anya years to make peace with her shifter animal after the incident at Bear Canyon Valley. And now there was this. With him. Anya didn't want it to cause friction between her and her tigress. The second factor was she'd gone against everything she'd promised herself she would never do. She'd taken on being the bodyguard for a child. Anya sighed. She didn't want to fracture the somewhat tenuous relationship she had with her feline, but she'd never stopped being regretful about what had happened. I can't afford to fail this time, she told her big cat. Her tigress chuffed, a sound of comfort in her tone. Anya knew she shouldn't have blamed her tigress. One young feline couldn't have done anything against those shifters, they'd been outnumbered. I'm sorry. Her tigress made a low growl, a mourning sound. I'm sad too. But I shouldn't have blamed you. Movement caught her attention, and she glanced at the door. Bryson was watching her, a solemn expression on his face. Pushing back her memories, she forced a smile to her lips and got out of the car. With her focus on him, she popped the trunk. He was wearing a black suit, clearly tailor-made. It cost more than my entire wardrobe, I bet. It fit him to a T. It didn't hide his physique, the wide chest and broad shoulders, a body with just the right amount of muscles, boasting a lot of time spent in the gym. Of course, she thought, remembering the gym in the back of the house. I'll get your bags. She looked down at his shiny, unscuffed shoes, then all the way up to his flawless jacket without so much as a wrinkle or a speck of dust or lint on it. I can get them. I'd hate for you to dirty your suit before you go to the office. Where is his office? One more fact missing from the file. She couldn't give up thinking about stuff like this, even if he'd said all she was supposed to do was protect Pepper from her loony grandmother and her associates. I'm not going to the office. I'm returning from a meeting. At 8 in the morning. That was an early meeting. Sometimes it works out that way. It means I'll be around later today if you need anything. He took her bags and placed them in the front hallway. Pepper came running down the stairs and threw her arms around Anya. We're going to play for a while, before we go to Senora Isabel's for dance. Let Anya get settled first. Bryson tweaked Pepper's nose. Anya checked on the room Senora Portofino had told her was hers. It was a simple room on the second floor, and she could see Pepper's doorway from the bed. Perfect. Leaving her bedroom door open just in case, Anya unpacked one of her bags and hung up the clothes that needed it, then put her toiletries in the bathroom attached to the bedroom. She hadn't seen Bryson since he'd carried her bags in, but he'd plagued her thoughts every other moment. She picked up another bag, heavy with the weapon Saz had secured for her, one she wasn't exactly supposed to have, but that was the nature of the business she was in. It was better to be armed. Finally, she double-checked for the new anti-trank medication Saz had given her. It was a new drug, one that made shifters immune to tranquilizers. He'd picked it up from some mysterious source, he wouldn't tell her who, at an exorbitant price. He'd laughed and said he'd have to raise his rates if he had to provide the anti-trank to everyone. Anya had volunteered to test it, and found it worked beautifully. So far it seemed safe to take regularly, though the cost made it prohibitive. When she'd mentioned that to Saz, he'd said, "Bryson Courtland can afford it." She looked around at the plush bedroom. That's for sure. Chapter 7. Days later. Playing. That summed up Anya's daily activities, playing and taking Pepper to ballet classes at Senora Isabel's. Each day, she and Pepper played in Marley's playroom, until Pepper wanted to go outside and swing. There had been no sign of Marley's, though Anya had a ton of questions about elementals. There wasn't much sign of Bryson either. Anya looked at her watch. "It's time for you to get ready." While Pepper was changing into her ballet outfit, she slipped into her room and washed her face, then reapplied some powder and lip gloss. Pepper should be ready by now. She made a dash toward the door and was one step away from leaving her room when she ran into a wall of solid, muscled chest. She bounced back with an oomph. Bryson put a hand on her elbow, steadying her. "Sorry. I didn't anticipate you'd come barreling out." His fingertips on her flesh transmitted a heat that flushed throughout her. "I should stay away from this man. He's bad for business. The kind of business I'm in shouldn't involve emotions of any kind, not love and certainly not lust." But she knew it was much more than lust. The way her tigress was reacting to his leopard was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. Think. It was hard to put a sentence together when he was so close to her. Her brain refused to function, as if all the blood had flowed elsewhere, to the very place that pulsed a beat matching the pulse of her tigress, which she could feel in her fingertips. Clearly he felt something, or his body wouldn't react this way. But this is so very wrong. I'm here to do a job and then get out. I don't do emotions. She had given up on emotions after Astra's mother was killed, and Astra had moved. Love led to nothing more than heartbreak. People you loved left your life. She would have counted her parents in that too, if she'd remembered them, but she had no memory of her parents. The only one she remembered was May. She'd been raised in a shifter orphanage until she was 12. Then one day, May had appeared at the orphanage and taken her to Bear Canyon Valley, the first and last place she'd called home. Until the shifters attacked. Now she didn't call any place home. It was easier that way. Sadness washed through her at the thought of May, who'd cared for her and loved her. May, who'd sent her to Saz to help her get over her past.
Bryson leaned against the jamb, one arm held high, as if he was supporting the wall, his muscular body blocking her exit. His head was cocked, that strong jawline softened by his lips, the full bottom one and the sensually curved upper lip. His body screamed predator, his stance a hunter's. His gaze took in her face, as if he was intent on reading her. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" His voice was low, and sounded as if it was wrapping her in an embrace. She swallowed her breathlessness down. "Don't look at me like that. Don't look at you, as if I want to do this." His other hand reached for her, landed on her hip, and pulled her close. "Or this." He lowered his head. "He's going to kiss me." She knew that. Knew she should pull back, that she should push him away, but she wouldn't. Deep down, she wanted this with a fierceness that made her body feel like she was a string on an instrument, ready to be plucked and played. She had no business feeling anything for him, much less this crazy attraction, as if she'd known him all her life, as if they'd always had this chemistry, as if it had always been just the two of them. God. I've given up already. Why did he have to come into my life and screw everything up? She wanted to be angry, but staring into those blue eyes, seeing his leopard's amber glow in their depths, it was too damned easy to give in. She'd spent so many years, so much time, fighting the demons inside her, and protecting Cass's clients from the evil on the outside. Bryson fought his leopard's urge to claim her mouth, her tongue, her heart. He wanted to rip every shred of clothing from this woman, and let her release her tigress inside her. But Saz had warned him. Without giving too many details, he told Bryson she wasn't to be pushed. Fuck, this is hard. It was harder than hell not to take what he knew was his, what he was ready to claim. He lowered his head to hers, and a jolt of joy pinged him when she angled her head. He hadn't been expecting that. He'd been expecting to be decked, not to have her yield her lips to him. He pressed forward, his lips brushing against hers, his tongue sliding along the seam, parting her lips, their hot breaths mingling. He paused, pulling his leopard back because he had almost thrust his tongue into her mouth and claimed hers. Lowering his arm from the jam, he wrapped his fingers in her hair, twisting and twining until his knuckles brushed her scalp. "Mine," he uttered into her hot mouth, letting her swallow the word along with the idea of it. Her low moan was a response that shot through him, leaving him throbbing and desperate. When her tongue slid along his lips, his grip on her hip tightened. Was this the same woman he could see battling her emotions, reaching out for him, opening herself up? Her arms snaked upward, fingertips trailing along his arms, then his shoulders, reaching his hair, raking his skin. Bryson hoisted her, pushing her against the wall, his lower body pinning hers. His erection pressed against the softness of her torso. Her tongue teased his softly, as if asking for permission, as if she was still unsure. His hand crept up from her hip, over her waist, brushing the side of her breast, while his thumb slipped over the straining pebbled peak, evident even beneath its half-lace, half-cotton cup. Bryson. His name was a whisper on her lips. It was the tone in her voice. Bryson didn't catch it, but his leopard did, the tiniest niggle of apprehension beneath the waves of desire. He pulled back and ran a fingertip along her jawline. "Anya." Her eyes closed slowly, trusting like a cat's, then opened again. Her chest rose, and then a sigh followed, teasing his lips with her breath, teasing his heart with her promise. "Anya." Pepper's voice. Anya jerked away from him with a flinch. A door slammed. He pulled away from her reluctantly. To be continued. Pepper appeared in the doorway. "Daddy. You're home. Are you going to ballet with us?" "I thought I would." Bryson picked up his baby girl. Until today, she'd been the only thing that mattered to him. Now he had another one who mattered. "I was thinking, too, that we should have a picnic tomorrow. What say you?" He planted a kiss on her cheek, but his gaze was pinned on Anya, whose cheeks had a light flush of pink that rose from her neckline. "All of us. All of us." He put her down. "Now let's get to Senora Isabel's. This is your last class until after New Year's."
Chapter 8. Anya let Bryson drive, but she insisted they needed to be in the Peugeot. She assured him it was better to be in a vehicle that wasn't easily identifiable as his and wasn't so distinct. "Are you saying the Lamborghini is obvious?" She rolled her eyes. Bryson pulled the car into Senora Isabel's driveway. The beautiful white villa was set against a backdrop of green trees on the hill behind it. Isabel Tierro was a white tigress shifter, like Anya. Curvy and attractive, the dark-haired, dark-eyed former dancer now gave private lessons. Pepper adored her, and it was easy for Anya to see why. Not only was Isabel beautiful, she was gracious. She was waiting outside by the pool, lying on a lounge chair, reading a magazine. Pepper ran to her, wrapped her arms around her. "We're going to have a picnic tomorrow, Senora. Will you come? Will you? Please? Let's have it by the lake in the back." Pepper turned to her father. "Can Senora Isabel come? Can she?" Bryson laughed. "Of course." Isabel knelt in front of Pepper, putting her arms around her. "I'm sorry. I can't come tomorrow." She gave Pepper an apologetic smile. I have family coming today. I haven't seen my son and daughter in a long time. Raphael and Sophie are coming to visit. Isabel rose to her feet. Are you ready for your lesson? I expect you to practice while you are on holiday break. Pepper nodded eagerly, her little head bobbing up and down frantically. How are you? Isabel asked Anya and Bryson. Fine, Bryson said. Would you like to cancel today's lesson? Since you have family in town? No, they aren't here yet. Let's help Pepper burn off some of her energy. Isabel took Pepper into a room with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, while Anya and Bryson sat in the waiting area overlooking the pool from one wall and the dance studio from the other. Bryson watched Pepper, while Anya made every effort not to glance at him. She couldn't escape her mindfulness of his presence next to her, the way her heartbeat synchronized with his, the way every one of her nerve endings tingled with awareness of him. She tried to process what had happened. She'd never been forward with a man like that. She'd never taken a step so bold. How could she even explain herself to him when she didn't understand herself? A noise sounded from outside a car door. She jumped up. Anya put a finger to her lips, signaling Bryson to be quiet, but he was already on his feet, eyes narrowed, standing as if his muscles were bunched, ready for action. She gazed out the window. 6 figures were approaching, 3 men and 3 women, a mix of shifters and humans judging from their stealthy strides. She glanced back at Bryson, a question in her eyes. He turned his attention from the window and shrugged. I don't know them, he whispered. Maybe her company? She said a son and a daughter. There are 6 of them out there. 4 are shifters. 2 of the women aren't. Maybe your ex-mother-in-law's associates? The newcomers weren't walking up the driveway as if they were hunting anyone, and they certainly weren't hiding their approach. The music stopped in the studio. Anya glanced through the viewing window as Isabel opened the door and peered outside. That's Rafe and Sophie. Isabel's voice was full of joy and tears shone in her eyes. I haven't seen them in months. They've been in America. She opened the door and ran toward the group. Pepper scrambled into Bryson's arms, and they watched Isabel hugging the newcomers. They seemed so happy, Daddy. I've never seen Senora Isabel smile so big. That's what it's like to have family. Anya chewed on her bottom lip. They do look happy. Bryson was staring at Anya over Pepper's blonde ponytail. Family is good to have. Do you have family, Anya? The little girl piped. Pepper. Bryson's admonishment was gentle. It's okay. Anya placed the back of her hand against Pepper's soft cheek. I don't. We can be your family. Can't we, Daddy? Can we? Pain stabbed through the armor Anya was certain she'd made impenetrable, stabbed right through to her heart. She felt the burn of tears in the bridge of her nose and looked outside, away from Bryson's piercing and assessing gaze. She watched Isabel hug and chatter with her guests and family. Then Isabel gestured in the direction of the house and started to lead the new arrivals their way. Anya swallowed away her emotional response to Pepper's question and turned to Bryson. We should give her some privacy to enjoy her family. Good idea. Bryson opened the door for her and Pepper. They'd have to walk past Isabel and the others, but they could keep it brief so they didn't intrude. Rafe, Sophie, I want you to meet my sweetest little protégé, Pepper. Pepper stood taller and glowed at Isabel's praise. Did you hear that, Daddy? I'm a protégé. She tugged on Bryson's arm, then turned to Anya and whispered, but not very quietly, That's good, right, Anya? Anya nodded. Very good indeed. Behind Isabel, a blonde woman with vibrant green eyes gasped. Anya. Her voice was an emotion-laden whisper. There was something remotely familiar about the woman, somewhere in the recesses of Anya's mind, but she couldn't place her. Perhaps she'd met her on one of the jobs Saz had sent her out on. Isabel took the blonde by the hand and pulled her forward. Astra, do you know Anya Masenti? It was Anya's turn to gasp. Can it be? The hair. The luminescent green eyes. But this was a woman, nothing like the girl she used to know. Astra? She could feel a quaver in her voice. Astra? From Bear Canyon Valley? Anya, is it really you? May said you were in Monaco, but... The man next to Astra, clearly a shifter, a giant of a man, stepped forward. I'm Kane, Anya. You have no idea how much I've heard about you. Shame flooded through Anya. She hoped he hadn't heard she was the reason Astra's mother was dead. Kane studied her face. It was good. All of it. She's wondered about you, worried about you. He put his arm around Astra. Tears streamed from Astra's eyes. To her amazement, Anya discovered her own face was wet. Isabel was looking from Anya to Astra, then back. Rafe put his arm around his mother. Astra came from America to find Anya. Astra nodded. May said you were in Monaco. She's kept up with your whereabouts, it would seem. I just never knew it. One day, when I mentioned wanting to see you again. She took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. After we saw Isabel, the plan was to find you. Anya stepped forward hesitantly. I'm sorry about your mother. I wish I could have done something. Astra pulled her in for a hug. There was nothing you could have done. All those shifters against one young tigress. But still, you need to forgive yourself. May said you struggled with it after we left. I didn't think you'd still be struggling. I am. Anya contained a sigh. I'm doing much better. She chanced to glance at Bryson, whose eyes narrowed slightly. Yeah, he isn't buying it. Anya couldn't believe Astra had come so far and gone to such lengths to see her. The emotions flowing through her and between her and Astra made her uncomfortable. She needed to get away and process all of this. Isabel introduced them to Rafe's mate Jax and Sophie's mate Nico. There was some small talk, but Anya's head felt like she was holding seashells against both ears because all she could hear was a roaring sound that threatened to carry her away. She was in a fog of confusion and overloaded with emotions. She, who had no idea how to deal with emotions, was going into an emotional overload. She kept a smile plastered on her face and nodded at what she hoped were the right points during the polite conversation. She avoided looking at Astra, but could feel Astra watching her. Her gaze was almost palpable, like a current traveling between them, and every glance Anya made toward Astra verified Astra's gaze never left Anya's face. The scrutiny made her feel antsy. You'll need some family time, she said to Isabel, then turned to Bryson. We should go. Do you have to? Astra took Anya's hand, her eyes flashing a luminescent green that faded into a bright yellow, then back to green. A few days ago, Anya would have thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but not after she'd seen Pepper's elemental. Had Astra always had an elemental in her? Anya glanced at Bryson to see if he'd noticed. We should give you all time with Isabel, Bryson added. I have an idea, Pepper said, except it wasn't Pepper's voice. It was Marley's voice. Anya and Bryson both looked at Pepper, then their gazes met. What's your idea? Astra's eyes had lost their green and were a brilliant yellow as she waited for Pepper to respond. Bryson put his hand on Pepper's head, and his other hand reached for Anya's. He squeezed. He'd seen clearly. We're having a picnic. You should all come. Again Marley's voice. Can they, Daddy? Now Pepper was back. Of course. Come out to our place tomorrow afternoon. Say about 1. Lunch on the lawn by the lake. Isabel, you remember how to get there? Isabel nodded. Astra hugged Anya. We have to catch up. I've missed you all these years. Anya fought back the pinpricks of tears burning her eyes. She needed some alone time to work through all these emotions. She'd missed her friend all these years. Astra had been the other half of her, and when they were separated, it was like losing part of her identity. Couple that with the rift between her and her tigress, and it meant Anya was a mess by the time she'd arrived at Cass's doorstep. All the physical training she'd been put through to assure she'd never feel unsafe was nothing compared to the emotional obstacles she'd had to hurdle. She'd swept too many of those under the rug. Now, she had some emotional housecleaning to do. She returned Astra's hug. The energy she'd felt between them earlier was even stronger. "We can catch up tomorrow." She pulled away from Astra's embrace, feeling an immediate sense of loss. Chapter 9. Outside Anya's window, the wind whistled through the leafy branches. The branches created flickering silhouettes, tattooing the walls with shapes that moved and shifted every time the breeze picked up. The villa was quiet. Pepper had gone to bed long ago after a bubble bath and story reading. Little Red Riding Hood, except in Pepper's version, the wolf was the hero. Anya hadn't been able to contain her smile. She hadn't seen Bryson since dinner time, though she'd heard his voice when Pepper went downstairs to tell him good night. Anya hadn't left her room. She'd slipped off her bra, changed into her sleeping shorts and tank, washed her face, and got into bed. Hours later, here she was, still lying in bed, wide awake. Her excitement over seeing Astra had left her with a buzz that didn't allow her body to slip into a resting state. So she stared at the shapes the wind and trees were making on the wall. "This isn't going to work. I need to be rested so I can do my job." She felt his approach before she heard it. In fact, she didn't hear him at all. He advanced with silent stealth, light on his feet, exactly as she'd expect a leopard shifter to be. She felt his pulse in her body, his essence in her nerve endings. Then he appeared in front of her open door, blocking the light cast into the hallway by Pepper's fairy nightlight. Her breath caught, not with fear, but with anticipation of this man, sexy, muscular, alpha, standing in her doorway. She sat up, back against the wooden headboard, legs drawn close to her body as if she was trying to form a shield. He watched her moving on the bed, and she knew that even though the room was bathed in dimness, his shifter vision allowed him to see her features and he'd know her eyes were open. Toe heel, he drew nearer until he was directly in front of her, alongside the bed. "You can't sleep." His voice was a low rumble, a sound of the jungle. She shook her head slightly. "Want to talk about it?" "I've never been good at that," she whispered. "Neither have I." He took a seat on the edge of the bed, the mattress giving a light exhale as he put his weight on it. "We don't have to talk about your emotions." "Do we have to talk at all?" "What the hell? Where did that come from?" "Her tigress." Anya knew where the question was leading. She knew the tigress was taking control. Sometimes it was easier to let her tigress have control, because doing emotions wasn't easy, not even on a good day. It was particularly difficult after a day like today. "No, we don't have to talk." His thumb brushed her bottom lip, tracing and tugging with gentle pressure. A shudder passed through her at the intensity of his gaze, sheer molten lust in the amber flame of his leopard. Bryson leaned closer, his eyes glowing in that gorgeous chiseled face. A sound, one she couldn't identify, caught her attention. Her glance slid sideways, wondering what that had been. Bryson's gaze followed hers toward the window. "I'm checking it out." She pulled herself out of his embrace, half pushing him away, half twisting to the side and swinging her legs to the floor. "Not alone, you aren't." He frowned at her. She opened the window, then glanced back at him. "You stay here and take care of Pepper. She needs you." She shifted into her tigress with the slightest sound of stretching and clicking, then leaped out the window to the ground below. Anya sniffed the cool air, raising her muzzle to the sky. She found no scent of anyone, human or shifter. That means nothing if they've used Hunter's block. Her tigress growled in agreement. Leaving behind the dimly lit villa, the tigress padded softly through the manicured grass toward the wooded area surrounding Bryson's villa, pausing every so often to listen to the night sounds for anything that seemed out of place and to test the air for any hint of a scent. She made short work of reconnoitering the perimeter of the villa and the woods surrounding it, but came back to the same window she'd leapt out of without a clue to what had created the noise. It must have been nothing. A gentle fog was settling on the grounds, making the backyard seem supernatural and strange. The hair on the tigress's neck rose and a current rushed through her. She looked into the shadows under a large tree near the wall. The shadow moved slightly. And yet, none of the tigress's alarms were going off. Her eyes narrowed, she studied the shadows. A huge figure stepped out, dark amber in color. Large paws padded her way, pushed forward by powerful haunches. A massive head sat on a powerfully thick neck, just above a wide chest. He paused, this giant of a leopard, and watched her with golden eyes, measuring her tigress. Bryson. In his leopard. She studied his power, his gracefulness, his complete control. She felt his mind pushing against hers in an attempt to establish a sync with her. She didn't allow it immediately, letting her tigress fully surveil his leopard. After her tigress had chuffed a greeting, Anya allowed the link between them to open so they could communicate silently, in the way of shifters. But Bryson said nothing. He moved closer until his head was next to her shoulder, then he pushed against her. The sexual tension between them was a palpable lifeline that coursed through her veins. A ripple washed over her, much more than a shudder. He pulled back and studied her with a dangerously gleaming gaze. "What did you find?" he asked in their communication sync. "Nothing," she responded. Concern pulsed through her. "Where's Pepper?" "In a safe room." Unchecked emotions ran through her tigress's body. Desire for this man, this magnificent leopard. "You never showed me the safe room." "I plan to."
Bryson watched the white tigress with the green glittering eyes. Her mistrust of others, human or shifter, was evident. What would it take to gain her trust? "Walk with me." He issued the invitation, unsure of her response. She hesitated. Pepper couldn't be any safer than where she is right now. A safe room within a safe room. Designed and built by saws, he added. She cocked her tigress head on its elegant neck clad in gleaming white fur with ebony stripes. "How do you know saws?" "Long story. We go way back. Let's just say I trust him with my life." "With Pepper's life." He took 2 steps away, then turned back to see if she was going to follow, if she'd take him up on his offer to walk. She joined him, and they began a slow walk, stealthy and quiet, around the villa. "You trust him too, don't you?" he asked her. "I do. He saved my life." "What happened to Pepper's mother?" Here was a chance to get her to open up. He threw an idea out. "If I tell you, will you share something with me you've never told anyone else?" She turned to look at him, still matching him stride for stride. He didn't wait for her to answer. Waiting would give her the option to say no. There were no options between them, as far as Bryson was concerned. The only option he'd consider was that she was his mate. Forever. So he started. Pepper's mother was a hybrid too. It was one night, just once. We were friends, and we had Pepper. We remained friends after, and for a while, we co-parented. But she struggled between her leopard and her elemental. Then one day, her elemental killed her leopard. In his head, he heard her gasp, the human sound almost foreign in his mind. It occurred to him how rarely he'd synced in his life. Anya paused, then asked, "I thought she was still alive." "She's still breathing, but the Bianca I knew, the Bianca that was Pepper's mother, is gone. She doesn't acknowledge me or Pepper anymore." I didn't know what to tell Pepper. So, I let her think her mom died when she was little, because it's easier than thinking that your mom doesn't want you. Her tigress released a low, mournful howl in his head. "Wait a second. You're saying an elemental killed her leopard? Is that common?" They were halfway around the villa. A low growl brought them to a halt, and he looked into the darkness of the trees. At the edge of the thicket, a shadow stepped forward. A German shepherd. The dog snarled, baring its teeth. Bryson took 2 steps forward and growled back. The dog whimpered and ran away. Maybe that was what they'd heard to begin with. He returned to their conversation, catching a gleam of amusement in the tigress's eyes. "Anya, I have no idea what's common or not with hybrids. I have 0 experience with these things. So, what's going to happen with Pepper? Will she deal with the same struggle as her mother?" I'll never let that happen to Pepper. How can you prevent it? I'll have to ask someone who knows. Maybe your friend Astra. She has an elemental. You noticed? I did. I guess you get used to looking for that once you've encountered it. I wondered if you'd seen it in her eyes. They were back in front of her window. Ladies first. He stepped back. One powerful leap, and she was out of sight. He followed her up. She was already shifted back into her human skin, and he followed closely behind. Both of them were rumpled and wrinkled, still wearing the same clothing they'd shifted in. He picked up the cell phone he'd hidden before he shifted, and powered it on. Accessing an app, he turned it to show it to her. See? Sleeping like a baby. This isn't the first time she's been in the safe room, and she knows not to come out until I come for her. She took the phone from him, and studied the image of Pepper asleep in her bed in the safe room. Safe. For now. What would it take to eliminate the threats to Pepper in their entirety? I think that's another question I'd ask Astra. How to protect my baby from others as well as herself. You can access the safe room remotely. Saw set it up. And it's untraceable, so even if someone hacked into my phone, there's no way they could figure out where she is or how to get there. That's sophisticated. I don't deal with the high-tech or cyber part of Cass's business. Are you going to wake her up and take her to her room? I think I'll let her sleep for a while. I have plans for the next couple hours. The tone in his voice made her look into his eyes. What kind of plans? She asked the question, though the signal the amber glow his gaze gave off told her what kind of plans. His tongue ran deftly over his lips while a growl came from deep within his chest. He took the phone from her and threw it into the upholstered wing chair. When he licked his lips again, her chest clenched. A warmth ran throughout her. She wanted to tear her focus away from his face, away from those lips and mesmerizing eyes, but damned if she could. He closed the distance between them again, his face lowering. Her lips parted in anticipation, his breath warm. Before she could plan or react, he plunged his tongue into her mouth, owning her. He rubbed his lips over hers, almost like a primeval ritual that hearkened to them from ages ago. His heartbeat synchronized with hers, keeping a rhythm that pounded in her ears. He pulled back, leaving her feeling empty. A low moan escaped her at the loss. The secret, he reminded her. Anya couldn't process. Secret? What secret? You owe me a secret. Damn, he was right. Fuck, was he serious? He was interrupting this for a secret. I've never felt this way before. And that's the God's honest truth. No man had ever affected her like she was affected by Bryson. And it was much more than merely being affected. It was like being in the middle of a hurricane in a lifeboat. Except the lifeboat had Bryson and heaven on it. His lips swooped in for the kill again, taking her prisoner. His mouth owned hers. She dug her nails into his shoulders, felt the ache as her tiger claws pushed through her skin and dug into his flesh. He flinched and crushed her to him. She heard them erupting first, then she felt them. His fangs. Her tongue traced his leopard canines, relishing the leopard part of him that had come out, though he was still all human, complete and totally male. He slid large hands down her back until he'd cupped her ass, squeezing the full cheeks. His kiss grew deeper as he plunged the depths of her mouth. She retracted her claws and dug her fingers in deeper, pulling him in closer. Between them, his erection was a full-fledged transmission of the desire he had for her. God, he felt amazing. She, the ice princess, had finally melted as surely as if she had a volcanic wave traveling over her. His hands on her body, his lips on her mouth, her breath trapped in burning lungs, all of it fucking amazing. Her nipples purled against fabric, aching to be touched, aching to be released. The volcanic wave coursed over her, again and again, heating her to her very core. She lost herself in Bryson and gasped for air. Your scent is gone, but your body's pulse and reactions, tell me what I need to know. She nodded. This had to happen. This was more than just about her. This was about her tigress. In her head, the tigress snarled her agreement. She placed her lips against his chiseled jaw and ran her fingers upward into his hair, scoring the flesh. "You're mine," he groaned. And she was powerless to deny the truth. In seconds, Bryson had her stripped. She stood naked before him, a full-figured goddess curved just right. He cupped her breasts, lifting the weight as if testing them, enjoying the way they filled his hand. He felt her heartbeat racing, then she groaned, throwing him over the edge. Fuck, he'd wanted their first time to be slow, but he couldn't. His leopard wouldn't be contained. His leopard had to have her tigress, and now. She pushed closer to him, as if telling him that she knew the need and was equally driven. He wanted to make her happy, to give her pleasure, but he could see her tigress and his leopard weren't willing to wait for their human counterparts. He brought his head down closer to her chest and took a hard nipple in his mouth. Her hands, already tangled in his hair, pushed him lower while he sucked on her rosy tip. He lowered his other hand slowly over a soft belly, then touched the top of her slit, careful not to encounter her clit. "Not yet." "Bryson." Her whispered invitation made his cock twitch. Bare of any hair, he let his finger slide along the slit, still careful not to touch the center of pleasure. Heated moisture greeted his index finger as he lowered his hand, more and more. "So fucking wet. For me." His words were a growl, fueled by his lust. He thrust a finger in, unable to curtail the need to feel her closing around him. With a gasp, she took his finger in, her muscles tightening, her body pushing forward to take more. He pulled it out, then in again, watching her expression as lust traveled across her features. He added another finger, and she writhed against him, her wetness dripping down his finger. He let go of the nipple with a pop. "I want to taste that sweetness. I want you. God, Bryson. Now." That's all it took to completely veer him off one course and onto another. He undressed, his clothing slid to the floor with a whisking sound. She put her hands flat on his chest, running them lower. His abs tightened as his breath caught in his throat. Pulling her closer, trapping her hands between their bodies, he swept his tongue into her mouth, seeking, probing, claiming. Head thrown back, her lips yielded to him. His sanity flew out the window. He picked her up and took her to the bed, his cock aching with every step as he drew closer to the mattress. Within seconds they were on the bed, her legs wrapped around his waist. He pulled her leg away and lowered his head, her pussy almost within tongue-touching distance. Bryson inhaled, letting the scent of her sit on his senses, tempting his mouth, his tongue, his mind. Yes, his cock and fingers too. Every part of her tempted him. Desire to be with her, to be inside her, to be a part of her was pulling at him with a force that defied all others. He slipped a hand beneath her, his thumb slipping into her wet sheath, while his fingers came damningly close to the rosebud of her ass. She moved and squirmed, possibly struggling but definitely not against him. The movement served to have her pushing his digit in even deeper, while he pressed downward with his thumb, applying pressure to a part of her that he was sure was far too sensitive and without a doubt untouched. He lowered his head closer, letting her feel the warmth of his breath before he blew a gentle cooling breath on her heated flesh. He wanted to hurry this, to bury his face between her legs, to allow his tongue to replace his thumb. He stared at the red and pink lips beckoning him, with a glinting wetness. The desire to replace his thumb grew. He pulled his thumb out, studying her face as disappointment replaced glorious lust. Then he ran his finger upward toward a clit swollen with desire. He stroked it softly, watching her eyes dilate with yearning, her hips arch upward, a moan slipping out from her lips. His cock throbbed. God, did it ever? His breath still hot on her sleek pussy, he teased the little nub while his cock pulsed fiercely. Her chest heaved with every breath, matching his rhythm. Taut nipples pushed skyward, growing tighter and tighter. Her body was a feast. Lush and made for passion with him. Only him. He raised one hand to the creamy mound and stroked the nearest nipple, while making tight circles on her clit with his thumb. Fuck, I want to eat this pussy, he muttered, delivering rapid flicks on her clit while her hips rose and writhed. Her sweet puckered folds were covered in juices. While his thumb ministered to her clit, His middle finger slid closer toward her hot sheath playing near the entrance. He swirled it, loving the delicious sounds of her moisture merging with her light moans. He lowered his head, taking a first lick, a tiny one, but damn if he could stop there. He took a long, slow, deliberate swipe at her folds, lapping her flavor in. She gasped and released a long moan. His cock strained, pushing against the bed, seeking the warmth of her, though Bryson denied it. In his mind, his leopard bellowed frustration at the denial of an immediate mating. Bryson ate her pussy with a reckless and abandoned hunger, satiating the aching within. He spread her lips farther to get at the silky wetness, sucking on her lips, pushing his tongue in and out, fucking her slowly at first, loving the way her succulent sheath tugged at his tongue, gripping it with muscles that were ready for his dick. He pressed his tongue deeper, burying his face in, relishing the taste, the scent, the texture. Fuck. She was amazing. He groaned with desire denied while she bucked against his mouth. Lips buried into her folds, he sucked her clit, flicking it with his tongue. Raining a barrage of tongue flicks that left her a quivering, creamy mess, her hands gripping his head, her claws digging in, drawing blood. Brah. She gasped. Bryson. She raised up, almost to a sit as she squirted into his face, leaving him licking the results of her passion. His leopard and his cock had taken all they could. He pushed her back. It was his leopard's turn. Thoughts jumbled in his mind. All he could do was let his leopard take over as he thrust into her, reveling at her gasp when he'd filled her and stretched her to accommodate him. He went in deep and pulled back, then deep again, while she squirmed and clawed at his back, scoring his flesh with a searing pain that merged with the pleasure. Perfect, he groaned against her mouth. Fucking perfect. He slammed into her with a fervor that spoke of a need he'd never experienced before. She met every thrust with a passion that matched his, and then some. The calm, cool, and collected Anya he'd first met was gone. A red-headed, fiery dervish wriggled beneath him. One quick twist and she was on top, straddling his legs, facing him, while he sat on the edge of the bed. She rose and dropped her body, rocked back and forth on him, taking him deeper and deeper. He placed one hand behind her neck and pulled her in close for a kiss while his other hand found her clit, pressing and rubbing circles on the swollen nub. Within moments her head snapped back, her eyes opened wide, and her lips parted, preparing to scream. He locked onto her mouth and took her scream in deep, swallowing her passion as her muscles clenched around him over and over again in orgasm. The sound of her passion, muffled by his mouth, was his undoing. Her pussy was pushing him forward, milking, driving him closer and closer to the edge. He grunted, and with a groan and an uncontrolled rush, released himself into her depths. He clutched her close, pumping into her depths. She collapsed against him, all softness, female, and curves. All his.
Chapter 10. Anya smiled at her charge's antics as Pepper bounced up and down. Up and down. Over and over again. I can't help it. I'm so excited. Her blonde pigtails flew in all directions, loosening the braids and releasing fine hairs that caught the morning sun. Is this the first picnic you've ever had? Anya took her by the hand and led her toward the gazebo next to the duck pond. It's the first one I've ever had guests at. Usually it's me and Daddy and Senora Portofino. Anya felt his focus on her and turned around to catch Bryson watching from the glass double doors, the phone held to the side of his head. He gave a nod. Pepper followed her gaze. He works too much. It was Marley's voice. I'm glad you're here, Marley's. I have a question for you. Do you know what happened to Bianca's elemental? And her shifter? The dark blue color flashed in Pepper's green eyes, turning darker then lighter. Fear coursed through Anya at the thought of Marley's hurting Pepper. Please don't go, Marley's. I need to talk to you, and only you. Bianca's elemental healed her shifter. Not all of us are bad, though. You don't need to worry. I love Pepper, and I would never let harm come to her. I would protect her with my life. So would her shifter. Did Bianca's shifter have a problem with her elemental? Why would that have happened? Her elemental, Bevane, would never talk to me. I don't know how she killed Bianca's shifter, or what happened. A jolt of electricity coursed through Anya. Bryson was getting closer. We can discuss this later. Anya turned toward Bryson's approaching footsteps, now audible to her shifter hearing, and took a moment to admire his long strides, the way the muscles on his soccer player thighs rippled with each step, even under his jeans. This was the first time she'd seen him in jeans. She had to admit, he filled them out remarkably. The thought made a heat rise to her cheeks. She averted her gaze, but not before she'd caught the wicked gleam in his eyes. "Everything okay?" Anya asked him, pointing to his phone. "All good. Just business. More or less." The way he'd said more or less put her on edge. What was that supposed to mean? Why was he wearing an expression she couldn't decipher? She opened her mouth to inquire, but was interrupted by the sound of voices. At the main door leading to the back courtyard, Signora Portofino was escorting Isabel, Rafe, Jax, Sophie, Nico, Astra, and Kane toward them. From the shadows of the tree, Anya studied the shifters and their mates as they approached. Kane, a giant of a man, held Astra's hand. The impression he gave was that he was completely assured of himself and his surroundings. Sophie, who was obviously expecting, walked confidently next to her mate Nico. Anya studied Nico for a moment. He was quiet and always watching. She'd already figured out there was something about him that wasn't immediately evident. He was a soldier, or perhaps he'd been one in the past. Rafe and Jax walked next to them. Jax had an easy smile and a ready laugh, and she held Rafe's hand casually while his thumb traced subtle patterns on her wrist. The end result of watching the three couples approaching was that Anya wanted what they had. Not necessarily the same thing, but something like it, with Bryson. She caught him watching her, his gaze dark and intense. She stared back, unmoving, looking for answers in his expression. Why couldn't she let go and roll with her emotions? Pepper took Anya's hand, breaking the spell, then turned to her father. "Signor Portofino has made baskets full of food. The baskets are by the lake. As soon as our guests catch up to us, we'll make our way down there. Guess what I've had taken out and made ready?" Pepper started to skip in place. "The paddle boats?" "You bet." The child let go of Anya's hand, as if it were on fire, and catapulted herself toward the newcomers. "Signora Isabel, we have paddle boats." Anya stretched out on the blanket next to Astra. Sophie and Nico were in one paddle boat, racing against Jax and Rafe in another, and Isabel and Pepper in a third. "Does this place remind you of anything?" she asked Astra. "When we used to run away from Doc and hide." Astra smiled. "Yeah. How is he?" "He's happy now that he has someone." Anya cocked her head to the side. "And you're okay with his?" How should she put this? She didn't want to say, his replacing your mom. "You're okay with that?" "Considering she's the closest thing to a mother figure I've had since I lost my mother." Anya felt a stab of guilt. "Hey." Astra touched Anya's hand, her fingertips much hotter than a human's would be. "Don't. Stop blaming yourself." How could Astra have felt her emotions? "I can't help it. I'll always blame myself. You were young. You did what you could. I'm glad he's happy. I'm glad May's happy too." "May? And Doc?" A grin crept onto Astra's face. "Imagine that, huh?" Bryson cleared his throat. "Do you mind if I ask you about your elemental?" The smile vanished, and the color drained from Astra's face. Anya felt her pulse change, and her scent signaled distress. She looked at Bryson to see if he'd perceived the same, and wondered if he'd continue with this line of questioning. Astra rubbed her palms on her jeans, then stared across the water. Her luminescent green eyes turned lime, then flashed a brilliant yellow. "I won't ask why you're inquiring. I saw Peppers." She rubbed her hands again. The sound of skin on denim was the only noise other than the wind rustling the trees. "I don't know much about it. I'm supposed to go visit some people with May soon. I put that off so I could see Anya. I had to get some sort of closure about my past, and how Anya was doing." A single tear wended its way down from the corner of her eye, over her cheek, and landed on her top, immediately soaking into the cotton fabric. Anya took her hand and held it between her own. Kane placed an arm around Astra's shoulders. "She's wanted nothing more than to see you again," he told Astra. "It's been eating at her since I met her. She's got to get back now that she's met you, though." "Kane." Astra's tone had a warning note in it. "It's got to be said. Astra's having bad headaches. I'm pretty sure, and Doc agrees, that it's her elementals battling." A gasp slipped out of both Anya and Astra at the same time. "You discussed this with Doc?" Astra's voice wasn't raised, but her pitch was higher. "When you pass out from headaches, wouldn't you think a doctor should be involved?" Kane frowned, his tone dangerously low. "But Doc? He's not Doc, he's my dad." Kane shook his head as if in disbelief. "I can't think of anyone better than him to deal with this. He's the only shifter doctor I know." "What did Doc say?" Anya asked him. She was still trying to process the idea Astra had 2 elementals in her. What could happen? Could 2 elementals coexist better than an elemental and a shifter's animal? Doc said she needs to go to Denver with May as soon as possible to see the Order of Elementals. To seek some answers there. What? Bryson was reaching into the picnic basket when he pulled back, a frown drawn into a V between his brows. Order of Elementals? That's the group that wants Pepper. What are you talking about? Astra sat up straighter, her spine stiff. Maybe I should ask you what you're talking about. And why you'd go see the Order of Elementals. Bryson's frown grew. I don't know a lot about them. Just that they have the answers. May said they're a semi-secret group of elementals. She has relatives there. Why? What's the big deal? Anya had been chewing on her bottom lip. She released it. I'm here to protect Pepper from the Order. It seems odd that you'd seek them out. Are you sure they're with the Order? May said sometimes individuals fall away from the group. What do you mean, you're here to protect Pepper? Kane asked. Anya turned toward Bryson, hoping he'd tackle the questions concerning his daughter. He shrugged. I'm not sure of anything, other than Bianca's mother, that's Pepper's mom, told some people about Pepper. He paused and took a deep breath. Before Bianca left, she mentioned the Order. What have they done? Kane asked Bryson. Wait. What do you mean, you're here to protect Pepper? Astra rubbed her temples. Slow down, Anya said. We can't answer everything at the same time. I work for a group. I'm here to protect Pepper. You're a bodyguard? Astra's hand stilled. Nico's a bodyguard, Kane volunteered. You two should talk. He glanced at Nico, in the paddle boat on the water. Do you know him? Do you work for the same outfit? I haven't heard of him, nor has he been with any of the teams I've been a part of. Anya fully intended to ask Saz about him. So, why are you protecting Pepper from the Order? What have they done? Kane repeated his question. They tried to kidnap Pepper. Because she's a hybrid? Astra asked. May said hybrids were rare. What did she say about your having 2 elementals? Astra's gaze focused on the lake. Not much. A gust of wind blew in, and a lightning flash appeared on the horizon. All eyes turned to Astra. I can't always control it. Her face was a mask of pain. The headache is back. Kane pulled her against his side, his large hand cupping her head, massaging it tenderly. We've got to get her back home. It's not that dire. Don't overreact, Astra protested, but it was clear to Anya from the downward pull of her muscles in the grimace of pain that she was understating the matter. Concern for her friend's well-being flooded Anya's heart. Why don't you go back home, and I'll come visit you as soon as I can. After this. God, am I supposed to call this a job? When I'm head over heels for the client, and I slept with him? She took a deep breath and continued, when the threat to Pepper has been eliminated, I'll come visit. The paddle boats were pulling up to the shoreline. Pepper's excited shrieks filled the air as she ran toward them. "Daddy!" Pepper froze and frowned at Anya. "You should take care of that." It was Marley's voice. A chill coursed through Anya. Pepper's elemental made her nervous. Then a loud roaring sound pulled her attention away. At the far end of the lake, a large wave was building, headed for their end of the shore. "What the hell?" Bryson looked from Pepper to Astra, then to Anya. "Marley's." Astra's mouth was moving, but it wasn't her voice. Anya realized her elemental was talking. "Marley's. Stop. We know you're there. We don't intend you harm." "Either of you?" Marley's voice again. A flash of blue appeared in the depths of Pepper's eyes. There was a long pause, while behind them the wave grew larger and larger, rising like an enormous cobra ready to strike. Anya realized it was Marley's creation, and Marley's alone was keeping the gigantic column of water from crashing down toward them. "Either of us," the elemental in Astra said. The large pillar of water subsided, settling downward softly without creating any waves. Astra turned toward Bryson. "Your daughter is very powerful. If her mother's elemental was half as powerful." Anya knew where she was going with that. Astra didn't have to finish the sentence. Bryson nodded. It seemed he knew too. Suddenly, a dire fear for Pepper stung Anya. Marley's could hurt Pepper. She could do to Pepper's shifter what Bianca's elemental had done to hers. What was stopping her from doing it right now? Or did they prefer to do that sort of thing after a shifter child had attained adulthood, so they had a grown body to work with? Her head was spinning from everything that had been revealed, and a strong urge to find the answers overcame her. She'd go to May. When this was over, when Pepper was safe from the order, Anya would find May and get some answers. Chapter 11. Pepper rubbed her tummy. "I'm full." Her eyes were heavy, as if she was exhausted from the exertion of paddleboat racing. Managing that tower of water had probably been pretty draining too, Anya surmised, letting the little girl lean against her. "So you know Saz?" Nico asks. Anya paused. She didn't like talking about her work. "What about you?" "I freelance for him." Anya nodded. "I've done some work." Nico matched the nod. His expression told her he understood her need for privacy. "What do you do now?" Anya asks. Sophie put her hand on his. "He works for the Tiero organization. His freelancing days are over." Nico laughed, placing his hand on Sophie's swollen belly. "For now I'm staying put. At least until a special little white tigress makes her appearance." He shrugged, his eyes twinkling with merriment. "Who knows after that?" "She'll have you wrapped around her pinky," Isabel admonished him playfully with a warning finger wag. "Oh, and what about you?" Rafe raised his brows at his mother. "What about me?" Isabel smiled. "You're not going to be around your grandchildren? Because of him?" The smile vanished from Isabel's face. Anya looked from mother to son. What was brewing here? Hadn't they had enough drama for the day? Thank goodness neither of them had an elemental. She couldn't handle more tsunami-like waves or the threat of lightning strikes. "He doesn't want me there. He doesn't want me in the same country. My grandchildren can visit me here." Anya glanced at Jax and Sophie. The sadness on their faces meant they knew, but Bryson's face seemed to say he was as confused as Anya felt. "I'm not asking. I'm not butting in." She didn't have to. Jax, as bold in spirit as she was vibrant in looks, took her mate's mother's hand. "Isabel, won't you?" "No, I will not." The typically mild-mannered woman's voice held a steel edge. "It is over." "But Giovanni. I wish you wouldn't use his name in my presence." Rafe gave Jax a look. She shot him one back. "I don't give up easily." "Neither did I, once upon a time." Isabel Tiero stared toward the horizon. "So it's officially over?" Sophie leaned closer to her mother. Not officially over. There hasn't been any legal proceedings. Isabel let out a long, ragged breath. Yet. She shook her head. I haven't seen your father in a long time. You still love him, Jack said. Rafe gave a slight head shake, but the half-smile on his face said it all. He adored his mate's boldness of spirit. God, I do. Isabel bit on her lower lip, worrying it with white teeth. Anya felt a gaze on her. She found Bryson watching her, his expression intense, his eyes hooded, emotions hidden. In spite of that, a heat traveled throughout her. Was this how she'd be when it came to him? Like Isabel Tierra was, still in love with a man she couldn't have? Bryson crept out of Pepper's room. His little girl was in a deep slumber. It hadn't taken long for her to fall asleep. After lunch, they'd had another paddleboat race, and this time, everyone had been in a boat. There were no more deep conversations, and he'd enjoyed the company of Isabel's friends and family until they'd parted ways as dusk settled in. They'd agreed to get together again before the visitors left Monaco for Rome and then America. Bryson felt a sadness that their new friends would be leaving. This was the closest he'd come to family and friendship while he was here. What's keeping me in Monaco, anyway? Why don't I move? True, the country no longer had the charm it once held for him, long ago, when he was younger and enjoyed life differently. Those were the pre-Pepper days. Now, everything was about his daughter. Almost everything, he reminded himself, his mind on the curvy beauty who was sleeping a few doors down. There was still much on his mind when it came to protecting Pepper. Maybe the answers lay with the Order of Elementals. In Denver. He passed by Anya's room, stopping right outside her door. Standing still, he used his shifter hearing to try to pick up any signs she was still awake. He listened for her breathing, expecting it to have the regular rhythm of sleep. It didn't. Clearly she was awake. He wanted to go in more than anything. He wanted to talk to her. His leopard snarled, a not-so-gentle reminder. Maybe more than just talk to her. Her door opened. With night clothes on, Anya stood before him, holding the knob. Were you going to knock? Her voice was low, and her hair gleamed dark red flames in the dim lighting of the hallway. You knew I was here. Just as you knew I wasn't asleep. A smile curved on the lips he wanted to kiss. She turned and walked toward her bed. All she had on was a pair of shorts and a tank top, yet they drew him toward her as if they were an elegant, sexy nightgown. The cotton hugged her curves and showcased her figure. What's on your mind? She turned to face him. Her braless, stiff-peaked silhouette put something else on his mind. He saw her tigress's gold flicker in her eyes, acknowledging the lust that broiled beneath. I'm going out of town tomorrow. A day trip. It would be the farthest he'd gone since he'd hired Anya. No, that wasn't true. It would be the farthest he'd gone since Bianca vanished. Pepper and I are staying here, right? She moved toward the bed, sat with her back against the headboard. The question gave him pause. He didn't have to, he could take them with him. He'd feel better knowing they were in the same city. You could join me. Take Pepper around Paris. Have you been before? For work, sure. This time you could enjoy it. What about safety while you're at meetings? I couldn't guarantee it. There would be many more variables. No one needs to know you're going. Let them assume Pepper's staying here. I think it would be safer here, where at least we have the security measures set in place. I'm the boss, right? She glared at him, and a low growling sound came from deep within her. Tell your tigress not to worry. He placed a hand on her knee. Tell her yourself. She slid off the bed and watched him with those entrancing emerald green eyes as she shifted into her white tigress form. She approached him and butted his thigh with her head, then did it again. He shifted into his leopard and stood next to the stunning creature with her gleaming fur as he pushed for a sink. She opened her mind to him. Minx. Why did you shift? Because you would have sidetracked the conversation, and I wanted to talk to you. Sidetracked it how? She swatted at him with a paw. As if you don't know. Then she stretched and dug her claws into the carpeting. Shift back. I want you. Make me. Inside his head, her voice was playful. She gave him another swat. He ducked then leapt, pouncing on her, taking her neck between his jaws. Now what will you do, temptress? She struggled to free herself from his grasp, but only ended up further and further beneath him, more solidly encased in his grip. A tiny creaking gave away her shift, and he released his grip on her immediately, because it would be lethal to her as a human. Before she'd completely finished her shift, he shifted as well, finding himself on top of her as she lay belly down on the carpet. Hot shudders washed over Anya. Her nerve endings were tuned into his presence, into the weight of him on her back. They'd both shifted into their human forms, and his body covered hers as if he'd been fashioned for her. His erection pressed against her ass, tucked between her cheeks, demanding, hot and pulsing, even with the fabric of their clothes between them. She bit back the moan that threatened. God, he's going to think I'm an insatiable hussy. She knew he wouldn't. She knew he'd love every part of her, but still, this new version of herself, heated and melting for him, was new to her. Her shifter hearing picked up the tiny sound of his claw extending. The cool air on her back spoke of what he'd done. He'd sliced through fabric, bearing her ass to his hands and eyes. It's a good thing he can afford to buy clothing, at the rate this man goes through mine. She moaned in a low whisper, her need to have him inside her, to have him claim her fierce. His lips sank into her neck, making her think of the couple bond. She wanted him. She wanted him to bond her. What the fuck? Where'd that come from? She refused to let logic conquer passion, though she wanted him to claim her. His knees pressed her legs apart. Large hands pushed the fabric farther off her, as he spread his fingers between her nether lips. He ran them up and down her cleft slowly, with a tortuous rhythm that made her muscles clench for him. Over and over he teased her with a promise of more, until he finally sank his fingers deep within. She reared back, her ass rising to meet his hand as he pumped his fingers into her over and over like a jackhammer, crashing through defenses, pummeling resistance she no longer had. Her back arched. She dug fingers into the rug, pushing upward to meet his thrusts. She panted with each plunge. When he stilled, a groan slipped from her mouth. What do you want? His voice was a raspy groan against her ear. God, Bryson, her tormented whisper was ripped from her throat. I want you. You want me to what? She swallowed. To fuck me. She felt him move above her. She braced for his fingers to return, and raised her ass farther upward. What she wasn't expecting. What ripped a gasp from her throat. What filled her and stretched her. His cock, harder than she'd felt before, bigger than she'd felt before, plunged into her with a fierceness, stretching her to a painful degree that was matched by the pleasure it delivered. With that drive, he was buried in her, their pulses one, their heartbeats completely synchronized. She returned thrust for thrust, pushing upward to meet his every delivery, writhing and wriggling, a roar building within her chest that she knew belonged to her tigress. Let it go, he growled close to her ear. Give her to me. A howl was torn from her lungs as she threw her head back. Except her howl was soundless, it was all in her mind, her tigress releasing her emotions within Anya. You can hear that? Shivers ran up her spine. My leopard can. His words were panted out with each breath. Let her out again. He needs her. Anya didn't need another invitation. She let her tigress free within her, relishing the passion of the roar her tigress released, feeling his leopard's response in Bryson as her body clenched tighter around him and an orgasm coursed over her in waves. Fuck. Bryson released the word, as his body began to pulse a release deep within her, striking her spasming muscles. You're mine. His words were spoken so low that nothing but shifter hearing could have heard them. Her tigress heard. And within Anya, something awoke she'd never been sure would ever come to life. Chapter 12. Anya had convinced Bryson they'd be safer at the villa in Monaco rather than traipsing around Paris in unfamiliar territories. He left for Paris early that morning while Pepper still slept. Anya had watched him place a tender kiss on her temple. Take care of my baby. He placed his lips on Anya's. With my life, she assured him, meaning it fully. She breathed him in, his leopard scent, his man scent. Come back safely. Her words made her realize something. She'd fallen. She'd fallen so hard she now acted like she belonged in his life and he in hers. I can't do that. I can't have a relationship. Her tigress bellowed an argument in Anya's mind. I can't. Anya didn't have to explain shit to her tigress. She wouldn't understand anyway. Her tigress snarled. Those you love get ripped out of your life. Don't you get it? They disappoint and leave. Every single time. She needed to call Saz and ask him how long the assignment was supposed to last. She couldn't ask Bryson when she could leave. He'd get bent out of shape. She could only imagine the way his nostrils would flare and his jaw tighten. Truthfully, I don't want to go. This wasn't what she wanted for the rest of her life, being a child's playmate, but Anya also couldn't imagine leaving Bryson and Pepper behind. A burning in the bridge of her nose told her it was too late for her to leave without hurting anyone, at the very least herself. Clapping drew her attention away from the tears she didn't want to shed, signaling Pepper was awake. She squeezed her eyes tightly, driving the tears away, and forced a smile to her face when she heard running footsteps heading toward her. It was business as usual for her and Pepper. Pepper was the bundle of energy she always was, and without ballet classes to look forward to, Anya knew she'd be hard to contain. I predict a day roaming around the property and the lake. It was too bad Pepper had no siblings or friends in the area. Of course, how would a little shifter elemental hybrid make friends amongst others, especially when her father seemed hell-bent on keeping her elemental a secret? Understandably so. It was clear that having others know about Marley's posed a danger to Pepper. Then again, Moore would find out if he planned to take her to see the order. I wish Senora Isabel and her family and friends could come over again. I'm sure if you ask your daddy, he'd invite them. No, I mean today. Right now. Well, he's not here right now. Why does he have to travel to work? I don't even know what he does for work. I don't know. Maybe that was another question for Saz. Though was it really? Since she planned to leave, it really wasn't her business. Then again, if they'd wanted me to know, someone would have told me. Can we go out on the lake? Pepper's eyes shone bright with anticipation. Hell no, not after the display of that tower of water that could take out the villa and both of us with it. She couldn't very well refuse on those grounds. What would she say? I'm afraid your elemental will kill me with one display of her power? Maybe even kill you too. No, she could hardly say that. Please? A quick blue hue flushed through Pepper's eyes. Marley says she'll behave. Anya nodded. We'll see. Will you take me Christmas shopping this afternoon? I haven't bought anything for Daddy yet. I'm sure Santa has him covered. Pepper giggled, grabbed Anya's hand and headed toward the back of the property. There's no Santa, silly. Anya cut her a glance. No Santa? Oh, come on. It was Marley's voice. You do not expect her to believe in something like Santa Claus, considering the things this little soul has experienced? Marley's, if you've been in her body for a long time, could you not have stayed quiet until she'd had a childhood? She's never had a chance to be a kid. Listen, Shifter. I did not take that away from her. Bianca's elemental did that. Anya frowned. How so? Why did Bryson not mention this? No one else knows, but Pepper saw what happened to her mother. She saw the elemental kill the shifter. If Bianca hadn't had an elemental in her, she'd have been dead. You do know that shifters can't live if their shifter animal is killed. I do know that, though I don't know how. Most shifters don't. Elementals know about that. And another type of being. One that stays hidden from shifters. What the hell is she talking about? Care to share this type of being? Vampires. Vampires, Anya scoffed. Pepper's shoulders moved up in a shrug that was very old-world European, and looked very out of place on this innocent child. "Think what you will," Marley said. "Get back to Bianca and Pepper." Pepper saw her mother's shifter animal lose the battle with her elemental. The little girl's green eyes turned a solid blue, a dark indigo that seemed filled with sadness. I couldn't make Pepper vanish in her mind. I couldn't block her out, and I was powerless to stop Bianca from falling victim to that creature. She spat the final word out. "You're not friendly with her elemental?" "There are clans of elementals, just as shifters have clans. We are not all friends. Sometimes we are at cross purposes." "Marley's? The leopard that exists in Pepper, do you mean to harm it, her?" "I would never." "Then why did Bianca's?" Marley's shook her head. "Pepper's ready to come back. Can you behave normally around her?" "Wait. One more thing. How do you keep her at bay? How does Anya? Are we going on the boats?" Pepper was back. "Anya thought of the water tower the other day. Why don't you show me the woods behind the lake? That seems far enough to keep the water from being a danger." She took Pepper's hand and led her past the deceptively calm lake. Anya would remember the water's reaction for a long time. It would take a lot for her to trust a body of water near Marley's. "Sure. Can we collect pine cones?" Anya glanced at the tall trees. They reminded her of Bear Canyon Valley, a place that had been on her mind way too much of late. "I should visit May. And Doc," she reminded herself, since May and Doc were mates now. An hour later, if not more, they'd finished hunting for pine cones and other treasures nature seemed eager to part with, leaving Pepper with a full bag of mementos of the day. Pepper was dragging her feet through the pine needle-covered forest floor, her braids a disheveled mess, her face dirt-streaked. And she was a happy little girl. Until... "I'm hungry." She yawned. "And tired. Will you carry me?" "Sure." Anya bent to pick her up. The sound she heard wasn't easily recognizable. A whistle, as if something zipped by her ear. A bug? Didn't seem so, but busy with Anya, she didn't question it. Thwack. The sound came from a nearby tree. She glanced up from Pepper's face. A trank dart was stuck in the tree's trunk. What the hell? Anya whirled around toward the direction it came from. 4 figures walked out from behind trees, all in shadows cast by the trees that blocked the sun. 2 large men, shifters from the way they walked. And 2 humans, 1 male, 1 female. "You missed," the female said, her voice a low hiss that Anya's shifter hearing picked up. Anya pushed Pepper behind her. "Do it again," the woman said. "This time get it right." The man raised a weapon, aimed at Anya. She wanted to duck, to turn, to move, to do anything to avoid being hit, but then she'd put Pepper in the line of fire. The trank hit her with the force of a bullet, then sank deep into the flesh of her thigh. It burned as it coursed throughout her. Time to put a different set of skills to use. Anya collapsed to the ground, ensuring she landed just so. Her vision was unobstructed, but she'd flung her arm over her face so they couldn't see her eyes were open. Time to test Cass's investment. Though the tranquilizer continued its path throughout her, Anya didn't lose consciousness. She stayed on full alert, cognizant of her surroundings. "You shot her." Pepper's voice was shrill. "How dare you?" This time it was Marley's voice. "Shut up or we'll shoot you too, elemental." This came from one of the shifters, a giant of a man. Anya seethed at the way he was treating Pepper, but she couldn't give it away. She wasn't unconscious by doing anything about it. "It would be easier if you just used a trank on her," said the other shifter. A shiver surged through her at the sound of his voice. That voice. She knew it. She'd heard it before, but she couldn't place it. Damn, she wanted to turn her head to get a better look at his face. "Come here, Pepper." He was speaking again. His voice brought images to her mind. She thought of the day Astra's mother died. Anya blinked hard. Now why did that come to mind? "I'm not going anywhere with you." Marley's voice was cold. Neither is Pepper. A whirling sound behind Anya made a steadily louder sound. Whatever it was coming closer. I told you to trank her. Now look what you've done. Anya risked moving her head, hoping whatever was behind them was holding their attention. The four intruders were watching a waterspout rising from the lake and traveling toward them on solid ground. The waterspout made a creaking and crackling sound, a rectangular block of ice that was more than 12 foot tall. It's a fucking glacier, the man said. The ice moved closer, the crackling growing louder and louder. Anya chanced a glance at Pepper's eyes. They gleamed a blue fire. A large pop signaled the breaking off of a large sliver of ice. The spear of ice flew off the glacier and hurled toward the man with the weapon. It struck a tree by his head, splintering into hundreds of tiny pieces. Instead of scattering around him, the shards of ice became projectiles and seemed to be seeking him out the way a heat-seeking missile hones in on its target. The barrage of ice struck the man, piercing his flesh, driving into his body with great force. The man screamed, his eyes turning a gold color then red. The tree next to him burst into flame. Pepper stood there, her hands clenched into tiny fists, feet shoulder-width apart, head thrown back. You will leave. One of the shifters was barreling toward Pepper, intent on tackling her. Anya leaped up from her spot, shifted into her tigress before she could come up with a plan, and hurtled herself for the shifter. He froze. A gleam shone in his eyes, a triumphant, almost joyful gleam. I know you, he said. A slight creaking sound, a pop and a crunch, and he'd shifted into his animal. A lion with light streak in his dark mane. Anya gasped. She struggled to breathe, but found there wasn't enough air. Her mouth working to take air in, her lungs burned with the effort, but still. Nothing. He pushed for a sink, and without thinking, she allowed it, opening the communication link between them to be able to talk in the way that shifters did, without using their voices. So you do know me, little tigress. It's your turn to die. It definitely was him. She shut the link down immediately. He was the one that killed Astra's mother. But how was he still alive? Doc killed him, didn't he? The memories tried to return. She tried to bring them back, but all she could really remember was Astra's mom, dead and bloody. Her tigress roared. A bellow so loud Anya wondered if it wouldn't be heard in the villa, if maybe it would cause Senora Portofino to come running. He shifted to his human form. So you do know me. That smirk. He had the same smirk when he swatted Astra's defenseless mother. But wait. A spear of pain pressed on Anya's brain as she remembered. Astra's mother hadn't been defenseless. She was an elemental. She'd summoned fire. Flames had surrounded the other shifter right before this one killed her with the swat that severed her jugular. Anya shifted quickly, ignoring the discomfort of the shift. You killed her. Her voice was hollow, the words spoken as if by someone else. You killed Astra's mother. And now he's here to kill Pepper. She wouldn't go peacefully. She wouldn't let us take the girl. He's here to kidnap Pepper. Just as he was there to kidnap Astra. You can't. You couldn't stop us before. What makes you think you can now? He took a step closer. Bale. It was the woman. This isn't the time for a personal vendetta. She threw him the pistol the dead man had dropped. Take her out. We don't have the time to indulge you in a death match. He raised his arm to catch the pistol. A loud crack, and the breaking of a shard from Marley's iceberg creation made him look in that direction. The shard traveled swiftly and deadly midair, knocking the pistol out of Bale's reach. Anya's tigress snarled in her head, demanding a shift. Anya yielded. She owed her this chance at retribution. The tigress dropped back on her haunches, muscles bunched, and she leapt for his throat. The second shifter dove for the weapon, plucked it from the leaves, and aimed it at Anya. A pop, and the dart was buried deep in Anya's muscular thigh. She snarled but didn't let it deter her. Bale swiveled just as she reached him, making her miss the mark of his throat. She seized his shoulder, sharp fangs inches into human flesh. A growling came from deep within Bale's chest, just as he shifted into his lion. He shook his body, throwing Anya off. Anya's head cracked against the hard trunk of a tree, then she collapsed on the ground. He advanced toward her, blood pouring from the wounds Anya inflicted. She rose to her feet, disoriented from the blow to her head. A scream reverberated in her mind. Was it from the memories, or was it nearby? She looked around, saw Pepper with her mouth open, indigo eyes glowing. A loud roar from the side overpowered Pepper's scream. Expecting it to be the lion, ready to kill or be killed, Anya braced herself. She wasn't ready for the extraordinarily large grizzly that seized the lion in its grasp, ripping its tawny hide, digging 6-inch-long lethal claws into its mane, seeking to maim it. She recognized the grizzly instantly. Cane. The lion turned, sinking his teeth into the cane's bare shoulder. He bellowed, then lowered his head and buried it into the lion's neck. The second shifter intruder morphed into a fox, leaping for Cane's bare neck. Anya leapt into the melee, making a beeline for the lion's exposed under neck. A human scream came from the opposite area of Pepper. Astra was shrieking, her eyes glowing and fluctuating from green to yellow. Lightning erupted from the ground near Astra's feet. The forked bolt crackled through the air, piercing the lion's side, traveling through the massive beast, then boomeranging and entering the fox. The fox dropped to the ground, almost severed in half by the lightning spear. The lion opened its cavernous mouth to roar, only its roar was more like a rat's squeak as blood poured from its mouth. Cane's bear released the lion, letting the creature drop to the ground. The woman's eyes glowed red. Anya rushed her, leapt onto her, one fierce bite, a loud crunch, and the woman lay lifeless at her paws. Astra massaged her temples, blinking slowly. Cane shifted into his human and ran toward her. Anya rushed for Pepper, shifted, then took the shaking child in her arms. "Are you okay?" From the forest, a white tiger came bounding out. Rafe. He shifted into his human form. "There's no sign of anyone else. I'm thinking they were working alone." "What are you doing? How did you know?" Anya glanced from Cane to Rafe, then to Astra. "Astra said we should stop by and check on you. The housekeeper said you'd been gone for a while. So we split up and came looking." "They?" Anya faced Astra. "Did you recognize him?" Astra nodded, wincing with every up and down motion of her head. "It's over." Her eyes rolled to the back of her head, and she fell against Cane, unconscious. "She needs to get home. I've got to get her some help." "You should leave immediately," Anya agreed. He frowned. "There's one problem." He pushed Astra's hair away from her face, then pierced Anya with a stare that was almost accusatory. "She won't go. She feels she's connected to you, that she can't just say, 'Been nice meeting you, thanks for the memories.' She can't do that." Anya had a job. And there was Pepper. And Bryson. And her feelings for him. "I have to protect Pepper. The threat to her is gone." His face was hard, but his eyes held a plea. This was it. It was Anya's turn to do the right thing for Astra. She'd blamed her tigress for letting Astra down once, would she let her down now too?
Chapter 13. Bryson took one look at the two females in his life and knew the shit had hit the fan. Damn. She'd have been better off coming to Paris with me. Pepper was pale and asleep in her bed. Anya was even paler, and sitting in the chair by the bed. From what he could tell, she'd been dozing with one eye open. The moment she spied Bryson coming into Pepper's nightlight-lit room, her eyes had shined with tears. "I let you down." He glanced at Pepper. "She's not hurt, so what makes you say that?" "I should have listened to you. Maybe we'd have been better off going." "Maybe not. In theory, this should have been the safest place. Who knows, if they'd followed us, maybe they'd have had success." A cold spell ran over him, a feeling of dread like he'd never felt. "Are you up to discussing it?" She sat straight in the chair. "I can give you the details." "I have the details. Rafe and Cane are downstairs." He'd seen the bloody, tattered clothing. He'd heard every painful, frightful details. Still, I thought they'd have gone. He and Kane had a talk while she was up here watching over for Pepper. Bryson had already made a decision, but the talk with Kane solidified it. We need to talk. You're firing me. She looked down. I suppose I deserve that. My first failure. Failure? You risked your life to save my daughter. If it weren't for you, Pepper wouldn't be. He couldn't get the words out. Thinking of anything bad happening to Pepper made it so he couldn't hardly talk. Bryson tipped her chin up with his fingertips. I'm not exactly firing you. She studied his face. What's that supposed to mean? I'd like for you to stay with Pepper. A range of emotions traveled through Anya, from disappointment to rejection to elation, and now disappointment of a different kind. He wanted her to stay with Pepper, to watch over Pepper. The heat of embarrassment and even anger washed over her. What they'd shared meant nothing. She was his daughter's protector. Her tigress had been wrong. He didn't consider Anya as a mate. The pain of this knowledge cut her deeply. Her tigress snarled. I'll deal with you later. Anya pushed the tigress back. Do you think Pepper still needs a bodyguard? Bryson raised a brow. His jaw wore a 5 o'clock shadow. He rested large hands on muscular thighs. Bodyguard. He shook his head. No. She needs? He paused, scrubbed his hands over his face as if this was a difficult thing to put into words. Pepper needs a mother. Her own mother is as much as dead now. Anya was crushed. So, he wanted her to stay around and play mommy to Pepper. As much as that thrilled Anya, because she'd come to love the little girl, it meant she'd have to pretend she and Bryson had never shared. I can't. She looked away from his eyes, but even that wasn't enough because she could feel his gaze analyzing her. She jumped to her feet and went to the window. Staring out at the trees shuddering slightly with the breeze, she muttered, I'm sorry. She felt him move, felt his essence behind her, then she saw his reflection in the window. Is it because you don't want me? I want you too much. No. Why do you think that? You said you couldn't stay. She whirled around. I can't stay because I can't be that to Pepper when I feel the way I do about you. Her words were a hiss, low because of Pepper but filled with a passion she was denied. And you said you need someone for Pepper. I thought the other part was a given. She shoved his chest with both palms. Don't think that. Ever. Don't assume I know what you're thinking. He turned her around with the speed and supernatural power of his leopard. He kept his eyes locked on hers while his hand reached for the back of her neck and pulled her closer. Her breath froze on her lips. His mouth locked on hers as if perfectly matched parts of a puzzle. Around her, the world seemed to spin off into oblivion as his lips claimed hers. His other hand was on her hip, possessive, keeping their bodies tightly together. A warmth burst throughout her, a heat so pleasant and intense it flooded out all other sensations. A low moan slipped from her lips as his tongue plundered her mouth, owning her, denying all doubt. He pulled back, leaving her breathless. His blue eyes were warm like a sunny day, but on the cusp of turning cold if his will was circumvented. Will you go where I go? His thumb slipped under her shirt and traveled lazy circles over the bare skin just above her hip. Always. What are you asking? I'm thinking of a move to the U.S. It's been a long time since I was there. I'd like to be around our kind more. I'd like to find out more about Pepper's elemental and how to protect her from Marleys should I ever need to. Where exactly? Not sure. Bear Canyon Valley, possibly. Maybe Denver, where the Order of Elementals is. I'll go wherever you go, but there's one little thing. She gently nipped at his bottom lip. That little thing called couple bonding. Shouldn't I be the one asking? What can I say? I'm not an old-fashioned kind of girl. Footsteps approaching interrupted her next statement. Kane walked into view. We have an idea. Anya pulled out of Bryson's embrace. We're going to Isabel's, Kane continued. It's unlikely anyone will expect you to be there, Rafe added. Bryson nodded slowly, as if mulling over the idea. That's not bad thinking. Astra's awake, she's asking for you, Kane informed her. I told her it could keep until we were at Isabel's. How long do you need to pack? Bryson asked her. I'm a damned expert at packing and moving. 2 minutes.
Chapter 14. Anya, Bryson, Pepper, Astra, Kane, and Rafe pulled into the back of Isabel's villa. They'd barely gotten out of the vehicle when Isabel, Nico, Sophie, and Jax came out. Isabel held her arms out. Pepper jumped from Anya's and ran for Isabel's. Cara mia. Are you okay? Isabel hugged her tightly. Senora Isabel, you should have seen. Pepper gasped for a breath. You? Pepper panted. Relax. I already know what happened. Let's let that become a memory now. I have biscotti and warm milk for you. Isabel's gaze stayed on Anya's face. Are you okay? Anya nodded. Kane helped a still weak Astra through the double doors. Sophie and Jax flocked around her. No sooner had they entered the room than Pepper squealed, a sound of sheer delight from a 5-year-old, not one full of fear. You have a Christmas tree. She ran to the tree, blinking lights making her face light up. And presents. She kneeled and picked one up. This is my name. Daddy, Daddy, look. Pepper jumped to her feet, holding the red and gold wrapped present. Bryson's expression transformed away from one of worry as a smile grew on his face. He gave Isabel an appreciative glance and mouthed the words, "Thank you," when Pepper turned to show the present to Anya. Anya wiped away the lonely tear that had made its way to her face. She sensed a gaze on her and looked up to see Astra's luminescent eyes also full of tears. Anya crossed the room in a few quick strides and wrapped her arms around her best friend from so very long ago. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry. I'm sorry for you, Astra whispered. I know your life hasn't been easy. Anya's eyes met Bryson's. It's so much better than I'd ever hoped for, though.
The group of shifters and humans rested in Isabel's sitting room, throwing out ideas and trying to come to solutions to get Pepper out of the country without being noticed, and to do it as quickly as possible, because things were escalating for Astra, as evidenced by the constant restless flinching in her sleep. Something she'd been doing on and off for the last 2 hours. Kane held Astra while she slept, though restlessly, because every so often a twitch would make her jump. Anya was just barely dozing on and off, leaning against Bryson, who had one arm wrapped around a lightly snoring Pepper and the other around Anya's shoulders. She woke up when Astra flinched. She's got to go. The 2 elementals, Kane shook his head. I called May. She said they're battling. She's got to get the whole thing sorted. I'd hate to see what happened to Bianca happen to her. Could the 2 elementals do that to each other? Bryson looked down at the sleeping Pepper. I won't risk finding out. Kane's voice was edged in steel. Rafe held up a hand. Someone's coming. His words were the slightest whisper. They'd already figured out that of all of them, Rafe had the best hearing. Whoever it is not bothering to conceal his approach. He's just walking up here, as if he owns the place. Rafe's eyes narrowed. He lowered his head, as if concentrating harder. When Rafe raised his head, he said one thing and one thing only. This can't go well. A knock on the door was loud and insistent. Pepper started, eyes wide. She looked at Bryson. It's okay, Bryson whispered. Kane leaned Astra to the other side of the couch and was already at the door. You don't need to do that, Rafe said. He's not here for you. He. Kane frowned. He who? My father. Isabel had been walking toward the side door. Rafe's words made her pause. She turned around slowly. Giovanni is here. Her voice held a core of strength that was lined in vulnerability. She shook her head. He can't be. I'll get the door. Rafe waved his mother away. He's not going to get a chance to hurt you again. His hands were clenched into fists. Jax, will you? He didn't need to finish his thought. Jax had jumped up, taken Isabel's hand, and was guiding her to the sofa where she'd been sitting with Rafe. Rafe opened the door, and in stepped a man who looked so in charge, even the sun needed to get permission to rise. Handsome in a suit that was tailor-made, with a head of leonine hair, a look that proclaimed predator, he surveyed the room with flinty eyes. His gaze finally settled on Isabel, but there was a softening in the hardness. Tito said I should come check on the property. That's not it, Gio. Isabel Tiero, beautiful, her hair in an immaculate updo, full-figured and gracefully sexy, rose to her feet. When Jax rose with her, putting a hand on her shoulder, Isabel gave Jax and Rafe a look that said she could handle it, and turned dark brown eyes toward Gio, the father of her children. Why are you really here? It's not like you couldn't send one of your henchmen to come check on things. Are you having me vacate the villa? Gio squared his shoulders and stared down at the short beauty. The chemistry between them was palpable. It was sexual and so much more. He nodded. Yes, Isabel. I want you off the premises within 24 hours. Isabel's lips parted as if a gasp was going to make its way out, but she clamped them closed. Jax put her hands on her hips. You can't do that to her. Why are you such a... Rafe put his arm around Jax. Don't. There's no use. Isabel's spine straightened. She gave Gio a disdainful look. I never thought. She turned gracefully, as though she were on a stage in the performance of her life. I'll be gone. Her eyes flashed a golden color as she turned her back on Gio. I'm not done, Isabel. He was in front of her quickly, his tiger's speed preternatural. You'll be back in Rome on the first flight I can book for you. She raised her chin haughtily. You have gone too far, Giovanni Tiero. How dare. You're right about this. I have gone too far. Much too far. And I've been a fool on so many levels. He looked at Rafe, then Sophie, then Jax and Nico. Such a fool to throw away things other men can only dream of. Come home for Christmas, cara mia. Just so easily, you want her to forget your accusations. Rafe stepped in front of his mother, facing his father. Isabel put her hands on Rafe's shoulders. Let me handle this with him, privately. Gio nodded and followed her from the room. Wow. Anya didn't realize she'd said it aloud until Jax nodded. There's some kind of crazy chemistry between those two. Always has been. Rafe took Jax's hand. Think the storm's blown over? Jax asked him. For now. But there's always turbulence with those two. True, Sophie agreed, but there was a smile on her face.
Chapter 15. Pepper was in the room next to Anya and Bryson's at Isabel's home. Anya lay next to Bryson, thinking of the way her life had changed. She studied his handsome profile and wondered how she'd ever been able to think she could do without him in her life. Next to the bed on the nightstand, her phone vibrated. She glanced at it. Saz. Answer it, Bryson said. I thought you were sleeping. She picked up the phone, pressed to accept the call. Saz. How's everything? The voice that had been her safety net for her adult life acts. Fine. She looked at Bryson, wondering if Saz knew what had happened. I told him, Bryson mouthed. It's better now, she amended her statement. But? Saz always knew when there was a but. How could she tell him she was going to be with Bryson, that she wouldn't be one of Cass's operatives anymore? Bryson mentioned moving to the U.S., Saz opened the subject. This wasn't going to be easy. Saz had been there for her when she'd had her darkest moments. You're like a sister to me, he continued. Is he giving me an out? You know I feel the same way, she said. So I want you to be happy. Are you firing me? That would make things easier. Nope. I'm telling you, I have offices all over the world. He laughed. And with that, he hung up. That was odd. Anya set the phone down. What's that? I think Saz just said I could have a job with him no matter where I live. She raised an eyebrow. What did you tell him exactly? I told him. He tugged on her panties, his thumb hooked into them at the waist. I told him that. Another tug. He leaned forward, taking her mouth, completely overwhelming her senses. He dove in deep with his tongue, one long stroke after another, claiming, owning, taking, giving, promising, demanding, and completely, utterly delicious in his manliness. She pulled back and stared into those eyes and looked for the amber of his leopard, seeking with her tigress. Bryson? Doubt colored her voice, though she fought hard to keep it from showing. Do you really need to ax? Listen to your tigress. His gaze was locked on hers. He was right. She didn't need to ax. She knew the answer. He pushed clothing aside, stripping both of them with the quickness that only a supernatural being could. His lips crashed into hers as he eased her back, sliding into her wetness with the ease of two interlocking pieces finding each other. His warm hands explored her body, traveling up and down over her flesh. He rubbed her breasts full and swollen with want. Her nipples pressed against his chest, their tightness painful, only satiated when he'd rolled them between fingertips, pinching and pulling. Each touch created a reaction deep in her body that made her tighten around his shaft. Slow and languid, he plunged in, then pulled out. Her breath quickened as his thrusts picked up speed. She tensed, ready to release, her muscles tightening and relaxing around his hardness. Her head rocked back. She sensed the change in his body before he began to climax. Something in him sent out vibrations that connected with her tigress. Those sensations pushed her into a set of orgasms that racked her body, leaving her breathless and seeing tiny spots. In the midst of the largest one yet, he pulled her close and latched onto her, sinking canines into the spot where her neck met her shoulder. Her gasp gave away the searing pain of his bite. With a long swipe of his tongue, he licked the blood seeping from the puncture wounds. The impression changed from pain to an apex of pleasure as she realized he'd bonded her. His thrusts grew stronger, more insistent, as he pummeled into her with a fierceness, the whole time releasing himself deep inside. With a final groan, Bryson pulled her close and held her while their pulses beat where their bodies were joined. They lay motionless, senseless, letting time seal what nature had created. Their hearts beat as one, their pulses slow in contentment. Later, Bryson pulled her head back and kissed her lips. Anya tasted her blood, iron and salty on his tongue. What do you think about Bear Canyon Valley? Or elsewhere? Where would you want to go? Not sure. Maybe New York? I could deal with that. Like Saz said, he has offices everywhere. He does. Going with? Bryson tugged on her hair gently, pulling her head back to kiss her. Wouldn't dream of not going with you, she answered into his lips. Forever. Forever. Epilogue. Merry Christmas. Pepper bounced up and down. She was the recipient of a slew of presents, trucked in by Giovanni Tiero, who proclaimed, I better get used to this, what with all the little Tieros that will be running around. Nico put his hand on Sophie's belly. Sophie beamed at her father. A shrill ringing sound interrupted the gift opening. Ever heard of vibrate? Rafe muttered as Gio took out his cell phone. Giovanni Tiero, he said. Then, why are you having Maya followed? Gio paused, a frown on his forehead. Slow down, Federico. Another frown. What do you mean your men lost her? Why are you having her followed? Anya looked at Bryson. She had zero clue, none at all, who Maya was. Jax leaned in. She's a leopard shifter. Loner. Came here after. God, it's a long story, Callie told me. First Maya worked for Vax in Dallas, then she moved here and Rafe gave her job. Then one day she vanished. Bryson put his arm around her, his lips resting on her temple. She may not have known who this Maya was, but she hoped her ending was as happy as her own.
Thank you for listening. This has been a Shifters Forever Worlds book by Elle Thorne. Stay tuned for more episodes. Don't forget to subscribe and to ring the bell to be notified of new releases.